Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Barbara Boyer, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. Liza Jane sends her regrets. She's had some delay and some travel, so we will see her tomorrow morning. So I wanted to welcome you all. We've got several board members virtually today, and we'll get to you as we do our board member reports, but I wanted to say Happy Earth Day to everybody. And it makes me really proud of all the work that we do here. And I want to thank you all for that. It's really important, and we get to celebrate it together today. So welcome, everybody. We're going to do introductions. I'm trying to figure out if I think we'll go around the room and do introductions. Then we'll save the board member introductions for our board member reports. Does that sound okay? Or no? Nicole, what would you want?
Sorry. We can just have people say their names.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Bruce, I'm going to start with you, please. Just introductions.
Bruce Pastor from a public member from Astoria.
Thank you.
I'm Meg Reeves, and I'm here as a rep from the Water Resources Commission, and I'm from Quebec.
This is going to be funny. Are these on?
Some of them don't sound on. Your two did not.
There's supposed to be a light.
So I'm Dan Shively. I'm the Forest Service
Dan.
representative to the OWEB board. So you got 3 mics to your left. So.
Good afternoon, Chris Allen. I am a non-voting board member representing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay McClary. I am a public at-large voting member. I live in West Salem and work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde.
Good afternoon, Barbara Boyer, co-chair, and I sit here as a representative of the Oregon State Board of Agriculture.
Good afternoon, Stephanie Page, Acting Executive Director at OWEB.
Good afternoon, Liz Ekpawa, and I am the liaison from the Board of Forestry.
Hi, I'm Mark Webb, liaison with EQC.
Dan Brown with the Environmental Protection Agency as a non-voting member, and I live in Portland, Oregon.
Eric Williams, I'll start with you in the audience, please.
Yes, hi everyone. Eric Williams, Restoration Grant Manager at OWEB.
Andrea Kreiner, Executive Director of OECD.
Steve Patty, Dialogues in Action from Portland.
Kobe Min, OWEB Region 5 RPR.
Audrey Hatch, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator on staff with OWEB.
Eric Hartstein, Senior Policy Coordinator.
Renee Davis, Acquisition Special Programs Manager at OWEB.
Liz Radon, Regional Program Representative for the WIN. Jillian McCarthy, Partnership Coordinator at OWEB.
Nicole Bernardi, Executive Assistant and Board Liaison.
And Linda Replinger, Publications Specialist.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, and virtual, thank you. Mark, for some reason, I don't think that's really your background right now. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Mark Labhart. I have the privilege of serving on the ODF&W Commission as a voting member, and I'm, thanks to Starlink, I'm 2,700 miles in the middle of the Pacific Ocean right now, zooming in from out in the ocean. So that's not the actual background.
Thank you, Mark, for attending today. Jamie.
Yeah, hi, Jamie McLeod Skinner, voting board member at large, and in Central Oregon. Usually Mark's just probably less than an hour drive away from me with that, more of that background, but I am not in the middle of the ocean. But where I'm located is between the Deschutes and the Crooked River in Central Oregon. And sorry I can't be with you today. Baker City is an amazing place, so really regret for multiple reasons not being there.
Thank you. Aaron?
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Curtis. I am a non-voting member representing the Bureau of Land Management, and I'm calling in today from Portland, Oregon.
Kelly.
Hey everyone, I'm Kelly Coates. I'm the tribal representative on the OWEB board, and I'm also the Natural Resources Director for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians. and I am calling in today from Medford, Oregon.
Kelly, we're having a hard time hearing you. It's really faint.
Okay, I will turn my volume up to an extreme level and see if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Is that better?
Not really. Maybe a little.
Okay. I may jump off and try a different camera situation and jump back on.
Okay, thank you. All right, that is everybody. And then our IT extraordinaire, Regan, back there. Thank you very much for helping us out. So we do not have any public comment, is that correct?
For today, no.
Okay, so we are going to move on down the agenda to board member updates. And I know when Kelly gets back on, I will jump to her. She requested going first. She's got to dart out. So I am going to start with Dan first. What do you want us to know today?
All right, well, not a whole lot today, but one of the things we are finally rolling out the door that I may have mentioned here to this group before is we have a technical assistance pilot project for source water protection areas. And we've been working with Oregon DEQ to identify some high-need communities. And we're deploying really like hands-on specific technical assistance to help these communities take advantage of opportunities through the bipartisan infrastructure law for a lot of loan forgiveness within the state revolving loan program to try to help them get some source water acquisition and protection. We are very close to announcing our drinking water provider partnership grantees with the Forest Service and BLM and Oregon DEQ, as well as partners in Washington and NGO partners. And so that's pretty exciting. I was going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in West Bend with the Forest Service, but I'll let Mr. Shively take that piece. Bottom line is we're doing a lot with helping the community prepare for smoke associated with prescribed fires. And then, not out of my shop, but we recently announced 11.5 million in funding for the Northwest Pipe and Casing Superfund site located in Clackamas, Oregon. That's one that has some groundwater issues that we had been trying to clean up, but wasn't very successful. But we got a new approach and new money to try to reduce that. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Kelly, can we give a little audio check on you? And if it sounds good, I'll have you go next.
How's this?
Much better.
Okay. Good, thank you. And thank you for letting me go early. My apologies, this week is a bit crazy. So for the record, my name is Kelly Coates, and I'm the tribal rep for the OWEB board. It's been, I mean, I guess there's just never a dull moment in natural resources anymore, is there? We used to have downtime, right? But I don't think that's a thing anymore. So, few things that have happened since the last time we met. I attended the Umpqua Fisheries Enhancement Derby. This is a local event that happens in Roseburg. Any of the proceeds that are made from the Derby, there's an auction dinner that's associated with it, and then a fishing event goes to going back into the Umpqua watershed to do restoration and fisheries work there. So it was another great year for the Derby. Mark was able to join us as well for this, as well as Commissioner Spellbrink from the ODFW Commission. And it's a great way, I bring this up because a lot of the folks that get Umpqua Fisheries Enhancement Derby grants use those grants as match potentially for OWEB grants as well, because it's non-federal funding, non-state funding. So just another way we can start, doing some restoration work and getting some funding on the ground through various local efforts. The Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians had their meeting in Portland the last week of January, and I was able to attend on January 30th and sit in on the Natural Resources Committee and the Climate Committees. Always really interesting to hear. That's a gathering of tribal organizations from throughout the Pacific Northwest. I was able to attend a dinner with the Legislative Commission on Indian Services and the Water Caucus members on March 19th, just to get to know some of the members of the caucus a little bit and talk about water issues that the tribes are facing and how we can all work together on creating a better water future for all Oregonians, taking some of the concepts that we've been talking about for years now, including the 100-year water vision, the Tribal Water Task Force, the place-based planning, the regional planning teams that have been engaged, and see if there's a way that we can all bring all of those concepts together and move forward in a way that we can really plan for a solid water future for the state of Oregon. So I'm really heartened to hear that and excited to see where the caucus goes with things into the future. I attended the Climate and Water Committee for OWEB, the meeting on March 6th, and then facilitated the OWEB DEI committee meeting on March 5th. I think the highlight for me, though, was a tour that myself, Stephanie, and Liz Redon did with Elderberry Wisdom Farms, just outside of Salem. They are a Native American nonprofit corporation. They've been created to assist Native Americans as they integrate academics, service learning, and cultural and ecological knowledge while creating agriculture and horticulture career pathways. We were able to tour the farm and discuss what the farm is doing, what their goals and objectives are, what their plans for the future are, and how they can engage with OWEB into the future, potentially on restoration work and supporting the restoration work that organizations do within the Willamette Valley and within the state of Oregon. And I'm really excited to see where this organization goes, and was really happy that I was able to be a part of a meeting with a non-traditional partner that I see really great things for happening in the future. So that was probably my highlight. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, Mark, are you comfortable ready to give us an update? Well, this is your first time in person. It's nice to see you in person today, and welcome. Do you want to give us a little bit of background of yourself?
Sure.
And then,
Yeah, I really hate to do it. So, Mark Webb, EQC liaison. I'm currently executive director for Blue Mountain Forest Partners. We're a collaborative that works primarily on the Malheur National Forest. I think what characterizes our work is that we move from litigation and no active management, working with industry, community members, and conservation members, to a pretty robust program of active management on the Malheur that really targets ecologically informed restoration treatments that provide socioeconomic benefits for the timber industry and the area community. So that's what I do primarily. Do a little bit of contracting on the side, fencing, juniper cutting, and the like. But I am here in my capacity as EQC liaison, and I've been an OWEB board member only a little less in time than an EQC member, but I was going to share two things with y'all. One is we're reinitiating a number of TMDLs. Y'all probably know those better than I do. I'll just read this paragraph. So the Department of Environmental Quality is developing water quality improvement plans known as total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, across the state. EQ is currently working on TMDL development projects in 6 watersheds throughout Oregon, and it'll go beyond that. The TMDLs are analyzing sources of pollution, and this include temperature, bacteria, dissolved oxygen, and pH, and a combination of those, and identifying pollution reduction efforts to improve water quality across the state. DEQ also develops an accompanying water quality management plan to help guide the implementation I'll just say that's really important for communities like mine. We're a rural community, ag focused, and it's often a concern. And there's a lot of fish work going on in our area. The other thing I wanted to share is the Climate Protection Program. In 2021, an update on this, the EQC adopted rules establishing Oregon's Climate Protection Program. At least for some parts of Oregon, that was pretty controversial. This program set enforceable and declining limits on climate pollution from fossil fuels used across Oregon. These included transportation, residential, and commercial and industrial uses of fuels. Over the following 2 years, DEQ implemented the CPP, and we're already seeing significant changes in the types of fuels brought into the state and used by Oregonians. For example, nearly 1/3 of all diesel used in Oregon is now renewable compared to just 10% in 2020. So it has had a really significant impact in a short amount of time. And I think both DEQ and actually some of the folks that are under the new regulations were surprised about how effective that's been. However, near the end of last year, the Oregon Court of Appeals determined that DEQ had not provided a certain type of notice during the 2021 rulemaking, so a process issue or disagreement. Despite the very narrow technicality, the court determined the CPP rules were invalid. In response, DEQ staff have begun a new rulemaking with the goal of reestablishing the program to begin next year. And staff are meeting with a lot of different stakeholders interested in this policy space, including a diverse group of recently established Rules Advisory Committee members. And so my understanding is that they might work on the process just to satisfy the court decision, but that essentially we will reintroduce the same CPP. Yeah, I'll leave that there. So those are two things that we're mostly working on right now that I'm familiar with.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome. Let's stick with the Mark theme. Mark Labhart, what would you like us to know today?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, I want to start off with an apology. I really very much enjoy the in-person meetings. In particular, I enjoy the tours and going out on the ground and seeing projects and seeing what applicants have presented. So I feel bad that I can't be with you today, but it is what it is. So now the ODF&W report, many of you probably already know this, but our director, Kurt Melcher, retired on April 1st, and we've hired a recruiting firm, a process to replace him, and that's proceeding. We had 23 applicants, as I understand, that met the minimum qualifications. We have a small committee made up of some folks from the commission, the tribes, and the governor's office that is winnowing down those 23 applicants to the vital few. And we will be conducting the final interviews for the director on May 10th, a public process where the public can weigh in with asking some questions, and then the commission will go into executive session, and we will come out of that hopefully with a new director for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Second thing I'd like to report on is the state and ESA listing for the southern resident orcas, killer whales. There's 75 whales in 3 pods, and the Oregon Commission listed that southern resident orcas group as endangered under the Oregon Endangered Species Act at our meeting 2 months ago. The southern resident orcas have been listed as endangered under federal law since 2005. Survival guidelines are relevant for state agencies. Were also adopted, and they include monitoring and addressing the pollutants, increasing boater education on the current federal vessel buffer guidelines, to reduce vessel and noise disturbance, enhancing hatchery Chinook salmon if capacity and funding exists, and increasing the prevention of oil and other hazardous materials. They're an interesting species because they don't tend to eat, you think of whales, orcas eating seals. This pod only eats salmon. They've got an interesting diet, only salmon. So And of course, salmon are low in numbers, so that's part of the reason for their decline. Third thing to report on, the Restoration Enhancement Board is needing member recruitment right now. We're seeking qualified applicants to fill a public at large position on the Restoration Enhancement Board. And that board helps fund fish facility restoration and fisheries enhancement projects throughout the state. So if you know of anybody public at large that might be interested, they can get on the ODF&W website and just click on the R&E board and make an application. Something that I'm really proud of is the Private Forest Accord Grant Program. It's a brand new grant program set up by the legislature through a process that's been occurring over the last few years. And it was established in 2022 legislative session. And ODF&W funds the projects that provide a conservation benefit for specific aquatic species addressed by the Oregon Department of Forestry's PFA and Habitat Conservation Plan. The program just completed its first grant cycle, with Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission approving 25 projects, which were recommended by the PFA Advisory Committee, a total of $10 million. So they got off to a good start. They had a whole bunch of applicants, and there's 25 projects that we funded out of all those applicants. And so I'm really pleased that that program is up and running now, and we'll start getting some things on the ground. Last thing to report on is the Klamath monitoring. During the 2024 session, the legislature provided ODF&W with additional capacity to monitor the repopulation of anadromous fish in the upper Klamath following the removal of the 4 mainstream dams on the Klamath in Oregon and California. And of course, you know that's in process right now. The dam removals are considered the largest restoration project ever. These funds will allow ODF&W to document benefits to coho, Chinook, steelhead, and Pacific lamprey. So that's the end of the report, unless anybody has any questions for me.
Thank you, Mark. Liz.
Oh, okay. Am I on? I am. Okay, so it's good to be here. Barb, Stephanie, board members. I'm thinking that Meg and Lindsay and I can share a clothes closet. Because we're picked out the same jackets and kinds of t-shirts. So hi, Jamie, Aaron, Kelly, and ahoy, Mark. Okay. So anyway, I think I'm just going to talk about one topic today because it was a big topic for the Board of Forestry. It was the conclusion of years of debate, thousands of comments, hundreds of people coming in. And it was on March 7th, and the board voted to move forward on the original alternative on the HCP to U.S. Fish and Wildlife for the HCP. So for people who don't know about it, it looked at about a little over 600,000 acres of area that will be impacted by the HCP. It will help with the spotted owl and 17 other species. And but on the other side, which everyone wanted to see that happen. But I think what the controversy was about, and that was no secret, it was across many news articles, it was online and such, was that when this was started, and this was prior to when I was here, but what I understood, it was an effort to resolve some of the cost and work and certainty resolving harvest with the species and only cause a certain amount of reduction. Well, in the subsequent years that happened, a number of things came to light, and one of those is our analysis and our inventory weren't exactly as accurate, and it took some time to get to that. So in 2023, we finally realized the impacts, and they were pretty severe. So that followed a lot of other public impact comments on the APA. The staff worked really hard to try to make sure that these were the numbers. But in the end, on a 3-4 split vote, we decided to move forward on it as an entire board. We did work with the governor because we know that it's at least a 30% decline in harvest and subsequent revenue that'll impact about 5 coastal counties. But really, I think Clatsop will take the burden of that take that burden. And the governor sent a letter to the board previous to that saying that she intends to help where she can to support funds for the counties. So that is, I think, ongoing as we speak. The piece that we haven't talked a lot about is that the ODF department also receives significant amount of funds from harvest. And so we know that even now, there will be efforts to look at the organization and do the typical things that you typically do. You know, when someone retires, you don't fill the position. When, you know, you look at combining work, and we've all been there, we've all done that. And years ago, when I was in college, there was a speaker, her name was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and y'all know her, and I was at Humboldt State, and actually Cal was at that same speak in the auditorium, and she talked about the cycles of grief. And when you have a loss, whether it's your job or your position, or you even change your position, or you see your counterpart change a position, you go through it and you don't realize you're going through it. And when I have done that repeatedly in cycles in my previous job, one of the things that I found that in a natural resources organization, you have a bunch of thinkers. You know, you don't have a bunch of feelers, you have a bunch of thinkers. And it's harder for that group, men or women, to go through the feeling part. And like it or not, you have to do it. You have to go through the loss and sadness and grief and whatever. So I've been talking to a number of people about that, because the survivors, the people who stay, also have to do that. And I learned the hard way on that, and I talk about that a lot. So hoping that the governor can do some things. I want to say the day before we took the vote, 5 commissioners came, and they gave some of the most professional, compassionate testimony that I've heard in 30 years of my career. I was so proud of them in the way they held themselves and the things that they said, and the strength that it took to do that. And I'm sorry we couldn't get there, you know, for them on that, but they did an amazing job. I think Cal had some statements in the paper, and, you know, basically it was that, you know, it was really a hard decision for him, but the stability to work and operate in a stable environment, and that was free of risk from lawsuits and legal risk, was compelling to him. On the other side, you did have Betsy Johnson come in and say that, you know, that what we've done is not sustainable and that we were digging a big hole. So that was pretty much the gist of it. And now we move on. We move on to keep moving forward. One of the things that I'll share, that as I drove from Salem back to Medford, I have these long 4-hour drives, and I get to think a lot, which I don't know if is good or bad. But what I was thinking about was when I was a young ranger, and a decision maker in the last 20 years of my career. I remember an older ranger telling me, when you get to that position as a line officer, you must stay at least half a decade, because you need to know the impact of your decisions. And so you need to live in that community and go to the store and buy the coffee and go to the football field and sit next to the people who you are impacting with your decision. And I think that the sad part for me is that I was leaving the coastal counties. I was going down to the Rogue Valley, the sunny Rogue Valley, with my hard-earned but nice little retirement that I did not have to worry about. And I was leaving these county commissioners and these communities that had this, what I know is going to be a big hill ahead of them. And they're going to have to use every bit of their strength and innovation and creativity and positively to move forward. So I need to send a note to Commissioner Scar and just tell her, I just need to say, you did as much as you could, and however we can help, let's help. So that's all I have. And then, Chandra, who is on the board, is leaving, and she's going to be working for the governor's office here shortly. And so we'll have a space to fill, and the governor is supposed to make that decision sometimes in May. So that's all I have. So thank you for indulging.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I don't know that it doesn't address either the timber industry needs that maybe will go unmet or county general revenue, but the HCP did address some issues around water quality that will free up millions of dollars that have been held back. And I forget the details, but it is pretty important from DEQ's perspective that that's in place.
Okay, we should talk.
Yeah, so
Okay,
there's some bright sides.
there is.
I think that's the 319 money, isn't it?
Could be.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
been
great
held
point.
up for a long time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Let's talk. I think anything would help.
Interesting. Okay. All right, Aaron, what do you want us to know today?
Good afternoon, everyone. So just a few updates I'd like to pass on from the BLM. First thing is BLM nationally released last week what we're coining the public land rule for BLM administered public land. So this new rule for all BLM lands is changing some of the ways we do business and I would say in both small and minor ways. So the rule is actually a combination of a number of different policies, and that includes how we do land health assessments and how often. It also updates the way we identify and manage what we call areas of critical environmental concern. And those are areas which the BLM identifies for protection or conservation or as needed to protect public health and safety. And then it's also creating for the first time in the BLM's history leases specifically for restoration and mitigation purposes. So that's another big change for us as well. So if anybody has any questions about that, I just get in touch and I'll be happy to share any information I have. The rule does not become effective for 30 more days. And so after 30 days, that's when there will be, like application forms made available and actual new updated step down policy for us to follow. So we're still staying tuned in a lot of ways on the how this is going to be implemented, just like many other folks as well, until the rule goes into effect. One other update I have, which is I will echo the others, very bummed that I couldn't be there in person. I really genuinely enjoy and value all of my time during these board meetings. But one of the key reasons was it was great timing for BLM. We are actually releasing now for public review our draft resource management plan amendments for the conservation of the greater sage grouse. So we are accepting public comments on that draft through June 13th. We were actually just in Lakeview and Ontario last week, hosting public meetings, describing some of the major plan components and helping people learn how to provide their input onto the plan. And so those were, I would say, successful, but just for a handful of folks, but we're sure glad we were able to help them. Which again was, I would have loved to have been on that field trip based on everything that we've got going on our priorities, but can't wait to hear to hear how that went. And then the final thing, I think I mentioned this at the last board meeting, but we did develop another draft resource management plan that's out for public review through July 5th. And that one is for the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument down in Jackson and Josephine counties. I think also in Klamath as well, and then Northern California as well. So a lot of jurisdictions involved, and we're really pleased to see that move along. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. Lindsay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. For the record, Lindsay McClary. Since our last meeting, I attended both the Climate and Water Committee as well as the Grants Committee meetings that were held in March. I was invited to attend the Willamette Valley Soil and Water Conservation District Directors Meeting held in Polk County in February. I got to meet some new faces there, and I got to see some familiar faces with Kelly Beamer in her new role with East Multnomah. There, we got to talk about building strong collaborations between tribes and SWCDs, which isn't always as clear of a relationship sometimes. So that was a rewarding lunch to spend with those folks and talk about collaboration. I've also been participating in Caisson's Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network's FIP in their Tribal Engagement Working Group. I attended the local working group meetings for both Polk and Marion counties for the SWCD and the NRCS districts. During the last week of February, I attended a cultural fire roundtable discussion that was hosted by Grand Ronde. It facilitated dialogue between tribes, partners, agencies, and fire practitioners in looking at ways to collaborate, break down barriers, and push forward cultural burning. There has been an NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program Award in Lynn and Lane County, where the tribe is in partnership with Oregon Agricultural Trust, OAT, Long Tom Watershed Council, and Coast Fork Watershed Council. It's titled Restoring, Protecting, and Supporting Tribal Connection to Native Oak Habitat. We presented on the project to local partners and hope to be accepting projects in that RCPP funding pool by late this year or early next year. And I know that the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts will be including that story in the State of the Lands publication coming out later this spring. I attended the most recent Oak Alliance meeting in March to hear about partnership updates across the region, to learn about Prairie Oaks and People 2.0, which is the Oak and Prairie Investment Strategy, and to learn updates for Year the Oak, which is a campaign that is expected to launch very soon. If folks aren't aware of that, some regional partners are putting an effort in to get the word out about oak over the next year. So into 2024 and 2025, you might see logos and some effort in grocery stores, restaurants, schools, wineries, just kind of getting the word out about why oak is so important in this area. I had a great conversation with Andrea Krainer from OECD on tribal partnerships and collaboration, and we hope to keep that conversation going with an upcoming site visit that's happening, I think in May. I've been coordinating with OWEB staff to spend some time with Confederated Tribe of Grand Ronde staff, and we're also scheduled for a site visit in June, so we're looking forward to spending some time there. And then finally, I had the great opportunity to participate in the OWEB Executive Director interviews along with Governor Kotek's staff last week as a representative of the board. So looking forward to getting a permanent executive director appointed soon. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, Jamie, what do you want us to know today?
Well, first of all, and I'm sorry I can't do this in person, but really want to welcome Mark Webb. For those of you who are not familiar with his work and also the Blue Mountain Partnership, I've had the tremendous opportunity of actually sitting in, this going back a few years, in some of their meetings. And there's such a great example of Oregonians bridging divides to work together to develop long-term solutions for our state. So it's such an honor for Mark for us to have you as part of our team. So welcome. Again, on Earth Day, as folks were mentioning, really want to give a shout out to those around the state who are doing projects, but also sharing information. Often on OWEB, we say there are limits to what we can invest in, and that information sharing is really important. And as I often I'll focus on rural areas, so just wanted to give a shout out to some folks in the metro area. In Lake Oswego, they've got an ongoing sustainability fair, and was able to attend that just recently. And the information they're sharing that they're doing, helping to educate folks. Oswego Lakes Watershed Council was present, so one of our partners helping to share information. That was a real key piece. But the other thing that they were talking about is food insecurity around our state, and there was nonprofits there talking about that. And so just a reminder that the work that we do as OWEB is in the partnerships that we develop, the long-term impacts are, yes, our focus is on fish and wildlife habitats and enhancing natural resources, but those partnerships we work on, especially with folks who manage our working lands, our farmers and ranchers, really help to address those food insecurity issues. So going from the nonprofit that I mentioned, and they were saying that food insecurity has spiked 100% in their area since just last year. And the Farm Bill not being reauthorized and some of those steps that need to be taken. But there's also folks, small family farms here in Central Oregon who are working on those issues. But those partnerships are just so key to make sure that we're having those long-term impacts, again, beyond our overall scope. Some of the other ways that we're celebrating or have been celebrating Earth Day on an ongoing basis is OWEB's climate resolution that we passed a couple of years ago, and then staff walked us through a great engagement process that now it includes consideration of climate impacts and solutions in the project that we fund. And so this is ongoing, is for the public to know this is ongoing work that we do. And then just lastly, want to bring attention to some great series that OPB has put out just recently. Mark mentioned the dam removal in Southern Oregon. They've got some stories on that. There's also drought and water solutions in Central Oregon for those who are interested. They have a great series they did just recently, and the ongoing salmon war series that they have, talking about some of the tremendous impacts on tribal communities, but really impacting all Oregonians in the loss of salmon. And so, of course, that is our number one mission here at OWEB. But it was a great reminder of some of those ongoing challenge faced and some of the personal impacts. And I think it ties in really nicely with Liz's comment about that reflection on the decisions we make having a long-term impact. But really looking forward to the conversations for the next couple of days.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you, Jamie. Chris, please.
Thank you, Barbara. Again, Chris Allen, representing U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I've got a few kind of cherry-picked, high-level updates that are largely Oregon-based from the Fish and Wildlife Service. At our October board meeting, I did mention a proposal to list northwestern pond turtle, along with southwestern pond turtle, extending down throughout Southern California into Baja. I mainly wanted to highlight that just because the public comment period for that proposed listing rule was reopened a few weeks ago and is extending through March, I think, 8th. Also, a few more notes on the listing front. I've also, I think, kept the board and OWEB staff and general public apprised of a petition to list Western Ridged mussel, which is the first petition our agency has received for a freshwater mussel west of the Rockies. We've developed a species status report for that. We made an initial, what we call a positive 12-month finding, and we expect to make a decision as to whether to propose a listing or not. And I'm just getting my facts straight here without looking at my notes. I think that listing decision for Western Ridge Mussel in terms of a proposal will be sometime in federal FY25. And one more species to mention on the listing front, our office has been involved in developing a species status assessment that would inform a decision to list Pacific Fisher in Northern California, in Southern Oregon. And we're under a court-approved settlement to develop that species status assessment and to make a listing decision by August of 2025. Our project leader, State Supervisor Cassina Lee in our office, and her deputy Craig Rowland last week were down in Ashland for a internal regional Fish and Wildlife Service meeting. And for that meeting, they were on a tour of the Ashland All Lands project, which was, I'm not familiar with that project, but the board may be, and definitely OWEB. It's a FIP-funded project that I believe is mostly around forest health and fire resiliency of forest lands outside of Ashland. She wanted me to pass along that it was a fantastic tour. Many partners, including City of Ashland, TNC, NRCS, of course, OWEB, ODF, Forest Service, and many other partners. She was amazed at the strong collaboration and wanted to also give her appreciation for the significant funding that OWEB has provided for that effort. Couple more notes, one on our budget. It's taken a long time to get our 24 budget, and it's finally trickling down to our state offices. Not good news. It's relatively flat, if a bit of a decline over our FY23 budget. You combine that with cost of living adjustments that come out of our state office budget as well, and it really amounts to some belt tightening for our office this year and likely next year as well. Maybe the last thing I'll mention is Craig Rowland, who's been our office's deputy state supervisor for quite a number of years, announced his retirement a few months ago, and his last week in the office, I think, is next week. And the announcement for that position will be flying soon. I think that's all I've got, Barbara. Thanks.
Thank you. Dan, please.
Testing. Okay, great. Hey, folks, Dan Shively, Forest Service. Got a few updates. I shared out with Stephanie and Nicole our 23 aquatics restoration accomplishment report. So just that came out in mid-February, highlighted a number of projects. One featured project per national forest overall. Last year alone, we had 10 or more projects across the national forests in the state of Oregon where we partnered directly or indirectly with OWEB. Some of these projects occurred off the national forest through the Wyden Authority. And if you recall, when was it? Last summer, right? When we had our quarterly in-person board meeting in Sisters, Oregon. We saw one of those projects in the field there in Whiteches Creek. One of many phases of the work being done there. Some other great examples. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at that report, please do. If you have any questions or follow-up, let us know. One of the other amazing aquatic restoration projects occurs up the Mackenzie River at Finrock. And many of these projects are so large in scope and scale, they continue in phases over a period of a number of years. So that's been continued work in progress, working down from the South Fork of the Mackenzie. Please take a look at that if you haven't seen it. Like Chris just mentioned, we're finally seeing parts and pieces of our fiscal year 24 budget trickle down and show up. And what I wanted to share with the board and staff and public at large is that our fiscal year 24 Good Neighbor Authority funds and projects were just announced today nationwide. And in Oregon, that will amount to $1.7 million of work in collaboration with the Oregon Department of Forestry, Oregon Department of Transportation, our second year in a row doing G&A work with ODOT, and then several years now in a row with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So 3 state agencies picking up some significant Good Neighbor Authority funding. And then very exciting to announce that we did really well with our Tribal Forest Protection Act projects, 7 in total in Oregon, for a total of $4.8 million. And quite a variety of projects ranging from forest health and resilience to aquatic restoration to really investing in tribal communities with elders and youth and really leaning more into having tribal governments help our people in bringing forward traditional ecological knowledge in some of the land management, planning, and decision-making that we do. I think I've shared out previously on the presidential memo around restoring healthy and abundant salmon, steelhead, and other native fish populations in the Columbia River Basin. Memo from President Biden. And that was released, oh goodness, a couple years ago. We're finally, the federal agencies involved in this presidential memo are finalizing phase 2 of the assessment that was asked for. The first phase was to take a look at all of our existing programs, policies and whatnot, and see how those could be better leveraged and put to use for restoring the Columbia Basin's fish and aquatic resources. This next and final phase, which is due May 4th, to the Office of Management and Budget through CEQ, the Council of Environmental Quality, will sum up what all the federal agencies identify in an unconstrained budget, what federal resources would be required to restore the basin. So needless to say, it's a tall price tag. Just the Forest Service piece of this alone would amount to over $600 million a year. Did I say that right? Yeah, $630 million a year above our current base funding. And that covers 3 of our Forest Service regions, regions 1, 4, and 6, covering 4 states, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and part of western Montana. So stay tuned for more on that. Again, that final federal assessment will be into OMB in early May, May 4th. A lot of folks come up to me and ask, what's going on, Dan, with the Northwest Forest Plan Amendment? We've put together a federal advisory committee. They've met several times now in person. It's a 21-member federal advisory committee. They met last week, all week in Weaverville, California. They're finally getting down to the stages of issuing their recommendations to the agency around our original notice for amendment of the plan. And to remind folks, the purpose and the narrow scope for the amendment was really around climate adaptation, forest health and resilience. We heard about the All Lands project down in Southwest Oregon. That's a good example of that type of work. But also working with tribal governments more and ensuring equity and diversity comes through in all aspects and regards of the Northwest Forest Plan. So the recommendations from the Federal Advisory Committee come back to us. We'll formulate that proposed amendment coming out of that, and stay tuned for more on that. It's tied to our National Old Growth Amendment effort. So if folks aren't aware, in December it was announced that the Forest Service agency-wide From the East Coast to the West Coast, we'll be amending all of our land management plans to protect and maintain the nation's old-growth forests on National Forest System lands. And we've determined that the timing of that will precede our Northwest Forest Plan amendment process. We want to ensure that those, the Northwest Forest Plan fits into the national effort. So 2 parallel efforts running at 2 different scales. A lot on the table as we, continue to do some tough work remaining here in 2024 around ensuring forest resilience moving forward. A couple of other quick updates. Dan alluded to it earlier, Dan Brown at EPA, the Forest Service, EPA, state agencies of ODF, ODEQ, Washington Department of Natural Resources, Washington Department of Ecology, and the local counties and health agencies are all collaborating around increasing the use of prescribed fire on the landscape, while at the same time doing everything that's within our collective control and power to ensure public health and safety around air quality. So literally a touchdown here in a couple of weeks, we're going to launch a very large, unprecedented prescribed fire in Central Oregon. It's called the West Bend Project. All of the agencies I've mentioned in Oregon are convening around an incident command system and will be, as soon as the burn window opens up, doing several large controlled burns in and around the city of Bend, the first time we've done a project of this scale in what we call the WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface. And again, we're doing that together and in collaboration with all of the state health agencies and local communities. So stay tuned for more. The next big project will take place in spring of 2025 in Central Washington. So the last update, it's bittersweet. Folks, this will be my last OWEB meeting.
Oh my gosh.
I am stepping down as the Forest Service representative, and it's bittersweet for me because as I came in, my first board meeting, I shared with everyone. I remember coming before this board, before it was OWEB, back when it was GWEB, many, many years ago. But it is now time for me to hand the reins over to another person in our agency, and that person will be Brian Staub. So for those that don't know Brian, 18 years as our regional watershed program manager. Brian is steadfast, intelligent, smart, collaborative. He's very excited and looking forward to working with the staff and the board. And I'll be with you the rest of the week, enjoying every bit of it, and also enjoying working with many of you I know in my regular capacity. That's it.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate you being here today. And I know you struggled with that decision, and always appreciate when your input. Very valuable. I have a few people who would like to give a comment. We'll go with you first. Mark Webb first.
Just a comment. Our collaborative BMFP actually visited one of the projects that you mentioned in an earlier email. So Summit Creek Stage 0. We did drone footage over that. Happy to share that with the board to see what that looks like. It's a pretty aggressive sort of deal. And then we'll be monitoring it yearly or every couple of years to see what kind of changes in veg type occur there. So happy to share that.
Mark Labhart.
Dan, I hope you heard the visible gasp when you did that announcement. Oh, my Lord, you're going to be missed, my friend. It's been a pleasure working with you for all these years, and some of the projects you've led have made Oregon a better place. So I know we're all replaceable, but you're going to be tough to replace, my friend. I did have a question, though, that the Blue Mountain Forest Plan, I should have followed up on it as much as I have, and I haven't. So how is that, the progress on that, and how does that tie into the regional forest plan work.
Well, thank you, Mark and Mark. And yeah, I'm glad you asked the question, Mark Labhart. Going on this week, actually, is a series of public meetings around the Blue Mountain region here with our 3 forests that are collaborating on what's going on, I think, 18 years now of a forest plan revision in the Blue Mountains with the Malheur National Forest, the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest, and the Umatilla National Forest. And so many of you may recall the long story where that was being revised. Gosh, it would be about 7 years ago now, the deputy chief withdrew that effort, and we kind of had to do a stage 0 start over again. And so we put the control of the planning process really back into the hands of the forest supervisors. They stood up their own team. We've got blessing and approval from our Washington office and the chief to continue that work and to bring that to fruition. I don't know the particulars, Mark, about the specific timeline. I know they're maintaining a website with their discrete milestones and dates. I'm told that they're anticipating about 2 years out before a final decision and the record of decision to solidify those 3 plans. Yeah, so there are public meetings going on this week. I'm actually staying a day over to meet with Sean McKinney. He's our forest supervisor here on the Wallowa-Whitman Forest, and I'm sure I'll get some updates from him.
Go ahead, Mark.
I just think it's important to note, and Dan would know better than me how to explain it, the new forest plan revision process is proceeding according to the 2012 planning rule, as opposed to the 82 or whatever it was. So the 2012 is a much more ecosystem-focused planning rule, so the plan will look quite a bit different than what the plan that was pulled looked like.
Absolutely. I was talking with Dan Brown at that before the meeting began. And under the 2012 planning rule, it establishes the deciding official at a more local level. And so I think, with so much of our natural resource related work, it will lean heavily on the collaboration in these local communities and bringing all of our stakeholders together to find that common ground. Beginning about 4 years ago, we had established the Blues Intergovernmental Council, and it's a very large stakeholder forum that helped inform the development of the plan revision.
Thank you. Jamie, you have a comment?
Yeah, first I'll request, Madam Chair, if we could set aside or flag some time for the end of our meeting on Wednesday, just to be able to reflect on how amazing Dan is, how much we'll miss them, because otherwise I'd want to spend time doing that now. But also just a very friendly reminder, and I know, Dan, all the teams already know this, but just the tremendous public sensitivity around smoke events and the panic that often generates. So I'm sure there's all sorts of public noticing that's going out so that people know that's happening ahead of time. Again, I'm sure that's part of the discussion, but I didn't want to leave that unsaid. And then another comment that I've heard from a lot of folks, especially in the Bend area, is if you're going to do controlled burns, can they not be done on weekends when people are out doing all their exercising, climbing, hiking, all that other stuff? So just passing that information along in a friendly reminder capacity.
Thank you, Jamie.
All right, Liz, what do you want us to know? Or Meg, why do I do that? Sorry.
It's the jacket.
It is the jacket. It's exactly what it is.
The white shirt. You guys hearing this okay? My voice, that is? Thank you. Okay, so Meg Reeves, I'm the Water Resources Commission rep on this board. We had an update at our last meeting about what's going on in the Walla Walla Basin related to water, and I realized that we've not talked about that basin at all in this group. So just briefly, there's a lot of great stuff happening. I mean, they have serious water challenges, groundwater and surface water, but there's some real community collaboration happening there. And from my perspective, it's interesting that it's an interstate basin, which is challenging. I mean, it adds unique challenges to any water management situation. And I don't think we have seen a lot of interstate collaboration on water issues, at least on the West Coast, maybe. But here, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla and the Water Resources Department and the Department of Ecology, the Washington Department of Ecology, in around 2019, started developing a 30-year strategic plan for the basin. And implementation began in 2021, and they have a lot of stuff underway under that implementation plan, but they've been doing the implementation jointly, collaboratively, the three agencies, or the two agencies and the tribes. And most recently, both the Oregon and Washington legislatures enacted laws that allow the states to spend state funds, like Washington to spend state funds in Oregon and vice versa, so long as there's some benefit in the home state. And also I'm not really sure exactly, I haven't looked at the bill specifically, but it allows each state to recognize water developed under the plan. So I'm not sure what they mean by that, but it's reciprocity, and it's the kind of thing that can help an already, complicated management situation be managed, be managed like a basin rather than like two states. So, interesting. The integrated water resources strategy that we've been talking about for a while now, the revision to the strategy, recall this was put in place in 2012, amended or updated in 2017. An update was underway now, and it's been temporarily put on hold at the request of the governor's office. We have leadership adjustments happening in several natural resource agencies, either recently hired or there's searches are underway in ODFW, Department of Ag, OWEB, and Water Resources. So I think the governor's office is seeing that as an opportunity to really have a more robust coordination at the state, across the agencies that are involved in the plan. And also, I think they're interested in including more kind of near-term outcomes, both near-term and allowing sustained progress toward management, true interagency management, which is hard to do, as we all know. So there will be more, that will come back, but I'm not sure what the timing is going to be on that. And then the last thing is the allocation, the groundwater allocation rules. Recall, these are proposed rules that will provide for more conservative decision-making about new groundwater permits in Oregon. And they're generating a lot of interest in the water-using community. And the proposed rules are now out for public comment. Comment period closes on May 31st, and the current plan, the current schedule, is for the commission to make a decision on proposed rules at its September meeting. So, I don't know. That date has moved a few times, so we'll see whether that holds. That's all I got.
Thank you, Meg. Bruce, what do you want us to know today?
Thank you, Chair. It was a quiet winter on the upper left coast, except for Liz stirring things up. In February, like many of my colleagues, I was privileged to attend the board meeting with the governor's office regarding the executive director selection, and I'm pleased that Lindsay is continuing on with that work. On the 6th of February, I was able to attend the staff dialogue sessions that were facilitated by Stephanie regarding the draft DEI and environmental justice resolution. I provided an overview of the draft and then listened to the questions, concerns, and the suggestions that were provided by staff. There was plenty of feedback regarding some of the finer details of strategic implementation, which the draft doesn't provide specifically but leaves room for. There's some excellent language clarification suggestions where they were also provided, and I think they've been included I'd like to thank Kelly and Dan for the opportunity to participate in these sessions. Going through the draft with those truly caring and competent individuals was a treat. I hadn't anticipated just how engaged it was going to be. Some of the enthusiasm I heard from them was contagious, and I left those sessions hopeful and proud of OWEB's direction and the sincerity in its approach to every issue presented in the draft resolution. A couple weeks ago, there was a new paper was published called Braiding, this has to do with intersectionality, Braiding Indigenous and Western Knowledge for Climate Adapted Forests. It's subtitled An Eco-Cultural State of Science Report. It's a 100-page report coupled with a very comprehensive and interactive website. Of the four main authors, two are from Oregon State. One is from the Forest Service, the Northwest Science Center. I have that right. One, yes, and one at the University of Washington. In the website, one of the case studies that is highlighted is the prescribed oak savanna controlled burns and work that the Cow Creek Band is doing. It was a pleasure to look through a website and see stuff. Say, oh, I know those people. You know, that was great. It is a weighty tome, and I have not gotten through all of it, but I'm sure other people will find it interesting. And with your permission, I will get a link to that distributed. Ask Nicole to help me and get that out to everybody if they'd like to take a look at it. So it has a lot of opportunities for DEI, for many of our projects that are ongoing, so we can work with that. And lastly, I want to thank Liz for her, I think, difficult decision. And I live in the epicenter of the controversy and have friends and people I respect on both sides.
Yes.
I spend a lot of time talking to the publisher of the paper and the editors, and I will only make one cautionary tale. That community has largely lost their lower river commercial fishing or significantly damaged with a promise by a promise, a commitment, even a policy that was should have supported them through a state commission. Because of our excellent system of public participation and the changing nature of people on commissions, ensuing commissions did not follow through. And consequently, people were left as losers. And the community remembers that. So losing one natural resource, set of natural resource jobs, and what happens with the economy on another major natural resource employer certainly is exacerbated by the knowledge of what's happened previously. So the idea that we can make decisions and help and promise and move forward with remediation of sorts, how we follow through on that is of great importance to all communities in Oregon. And if done correctly, I think it makes a bitter pill a little easier to swallow. Thanks.
Hi, Liz.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for that. Thank you for your very sincere thoughts. Bruce, you had mentioned a little bit on fire, and I just wanted to share as well. I get through the Retiree Network the Joint Fire Science Summary for 2023, and it is an easy read, and it is across the country, and I think you all would be amazed how people are attacking this from different levels. And there's page 15 that I was going to just share with Kelly and Lindsay. It is a summary from the Southwest group, tribal group, and they came together on a consortium this last year, and they have these bullets on fire and tribal culture. So I might just provide a link, and I don't know who I would share with you, and really quick read and a nice roll-up to our fire season, and you're just like, oh, I didn't know so much was happening, and the inclusivity on that was pretty wonderful. So I'll send that to you, Nicole.
Thank you. All right, so Amy with NRCS was not able to join us today, so Stephanie's going to give her update, please.
Great. Amy and several of us were at a conference together last week, and so she's under the weather, I think, after being at the conference. So thanks to her for sending these updates. Amy would like to share that the Regional Conservation Partnership Program Notice of Funding Opportunity is live, and $1.5 billion is set aside for the two different funding arrangements that are available through the program, Classic and Alternative. She notes that a significant portion of Oregon falls within what they call the critical conservation areas that are a focus of the program. $100 million are set aside for tribally led proposals. The project max has been increased, and July 2nd is the deadline to submit proposals. There's also assistance available to support underserved communities, and there's a May 18th deadline to submit requests for assistance. Another Farm Bill program available through NRCS is the Conservation Stewardship Program. The minimum annual payment has been increased to $4,000 per year, and these are 5-year agreements. She notes that it's a great opportunity for farms and forest lands with a conservation value and ethic, and those looking to leave a legacy. Another Farm Bill program is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Local work groups held, those meetings have been held, local work groups that advise NRCS on local implementation of the program, and signups are currently going on at their field offices. NRCS is working to expand technical offerings to include new activities. So these have recently been adopted into the NRCS Field Office Technical Guide. These are specific practice types, and that means they're now available for both technical and financial assistance according to local and state priorities. So these new practices are low tunnels, raised beds, organic management, annual forages for grazing, and annual forages for grazing systems. They are looking at and working towards adoption of new opportunities for federal fiscal year 2025, including culturally significant plantings for soil health, vegetation management for non-ruminants, and amending soil properties with lime. So those are 3 other pending conservation practices through NRCS. On to staffing. Statewide, they are down to 90 vacancies, which is an achievement. They continue to work with their limited HR staffing agency to make additional progress. Interviews and resume reviews are occurring for the permanent Oregon State Conservationist position. No selection has been made at this time. The acting state conservationist is David Rose, and many of us had a chance to visit with him last week at the Connect conference. David grew up in Reedsport, Oregon, and he is currently the assistant state conservationist for field operations, similar to a basin team leader in Olympia, Washington. And he has prioritized hiring during his tenure here in Oregon as acting state conservationist. The partnership liaison position, which is typically the position that sits on the OWEB board from Oregon NRCS, has been prioritized for hiring. So she just wanted to let us know that that is in the works, and that concludes the updates from Amy. So wishing her a speedy recovery.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, I was at that conference last week too. It was Connect Plus. It was Land Trust, Watershed Councils, and Conservation Districts. And there was so many of you OWEB staff there, so I get to see you 2 weeks in a row. There was over 350 people attending this conference, and there were really really strong tracks and training, educational training tracks. And I did get to sit with Acting Director David Rose, and he said the application, the pool that's coming in is very low. There's not a lot of people applying. And I thought that was, he was very surprised at the amount of applications coming in for these positions. And he didn't have an answer as to why. So my Department of Agriculture update, we too are working on our strategic plan. You know, sitting on so many boards and strategic plans, not something that I really like to do. I'm actually doing a lot of that right now. So maybe I'll get good at it one day. The agency budget's request is pretty flat, you know, about plus 1%. So they're just plugging along, and they're doing a lot of organizing, restructuring of the organization and realignment. They're thinking about a bunch of realignment processes at the department. The specialty crop block grants were all awarded last week. I don't have that figure I don't know what the number was. And then there was also a really well-attended women's roundtable with past Director Taylor was in town, Alexis Taylor, who's now Undersecretary of Agriculture, Foreign Trade. So it was really nice to see all that. Connect Plus, I got that. Oh, and then I attended the grants committee meeting. I was out of the country, so my connection wasn't great, so I got to actually hand the baton over to Dan on that one. So he will give us that update when it comes time. So that is all I have, and we are running a little ahead, which is okay. So if we start early on strategic plan, are you three ready for it? Okay. So why don't we take 15 minutes? When we come back at 3:35, please?
Like a juice or something?
I could not even tell.
From here, I thought it was tea. Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Maybe a little tiny sugar. Okay.
I had something.
Yeah.
Thank you for the water. Going outside? Oh, okay. I know you will. Okay, thank you. Oh.
So it's nice to have this first meeting just around the corner.
Yeah.
I know, yeah. That's great. I drove up from that.
Quite a drive.
All right, thank you. I appreciate yours. Yeah.
right, welcome back, everybody. We are down to agenda item C, our strategic plan. So take it away.
All right. Thank you, Chair Boyer, members of the board. With me today is Steve Patty from Dialogues in Action, our consultant for the 2018 plan, as well as this refresh of that plan. And also Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator and co-lead on the staff team helping us develop the plan for you. And my name is Eric Williams. I'm the Restoration Grants Manager. What we're going to do today, I'll give you a little bit of background and framing for today's discussion and turn it over to Steve to walk through some of the details. And we'll close out with Audrey talking about our plans for measuring and reporting on progress for this plan refresh. And also, as kind of a side goal, by the end, we want Barbara Boyer to say that strategic planning is fun. See if we can get there. Okay. So this is our third time before you on this strategic plan refresh. If you recall, in October, you worked on refreshing the strategic priorities from last time. And then in January, you worked on the language for the strategies that fall under each of those strategic priorities. And so this time, the content that's new to you is going to feel different because it is very different. The priorities and the strategies that we worked on in the past really are taking kind of a longer-term 10-year horizon view of where we'd like to be based on those foundational elements of who we are and how we show up and how we approach our work. The tactics that you see in the draft that's also in the staff report for today's meeting are going to feel really in the weeds and a little bit operational. But we still wanted to run them by you so that you can understand what we're looking at for the foreseeable next couple of years. That's really the time frame of these tactics. It's the next few years rather than that longer time horizon. And so obviously, we're planning to adaptively manage as we go forward over the 10-year time horizon of the plan. Also important to note at the outset here, we've been asked by the governor's office to keep this plan draft. We had initially planned on asking you to adopt the plan at this meeting, but since we don't yet have a permanent director, the governor's office wanted to leave a little bit of space for when the permanent director comes on board to have a look through it. And so we'll likely revisit with you whenever that timeline allows us to, whether that's July or October, depending on our timeline for getting the permanent director on board. And so we're not asking you for any action today in terms of adopting the plan. And also I wanted to note that we focused on the strategies in the past. And again, the time horizon for these tactics is in the near term. And one of the things that's been in our mind that won't surprise you as we've been developing this is the attempt to strike a balance, really, between program refinements and new initiatives, given that we've had an awful lot of new initiatives since 2021. And, I think that has obviously impacted our staffing levels. It's impacted our workloads. We've talked with you many times about that in the last few years. But it doesn't mean we want to bunker down. We still want to stretch ourselves. And, this board has done some things in your work with the equity statement and the climate resolution that you'll see reflected in here. And some of those things, I think, truly are going to stretch us in a really good way. And then lastly, I did want to address, before we get into the presentation, the public comment that you received from the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. That's in I believe it's on the website, is that correct, Nicole? Because I think it came in a little bit too late to come into your board packets, but I think you have a copy of it now. And basically, their comments were around some of the language and the priorities and strategies that talked about restoration, watershed restoration. And they noted that to them it appeared that protection appeared to be missing. And I agree, and I think we can very easily incorporate their suggested changes that you see in their letter to include the words protection along with restoration. I'll note, though, that it wasn't that we were attempting to exclude protection from this. I think in my mind, we were thinking of restoration as inclusive of protection and the many other things that you need to do at a watershed scale to achieve the goals that we have. But I do appreciate the comments Colt made, and we'll make those changes after this meeting today. So with that as introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to run through some of the history of how we got to where we are and what this content is and next steps after this.
Thanks, Eric. This is Steve Patty with Dialogues in Action, and we greatly appreciate you as a board giving multiple touches to this along the way. It's helped us to refine and it's guided us in our thinking over the past few months. So thank you for visiting this again. In the board packet, you'll see 3 different parts to the document. And today, this afternoon, we'd like to spend most of our time thinking about part 3, which relates to the strategies and the actions related to those strategies. But to set that up, Joe, we'd just like to walk you through where we've come so far and then to remind you of a few things as we then dive in. We have taken strategic planning in 3 different phases. The Get Clear phase, we did community and partner interviews, 29 of them. Summary is in an appendix. We did a community partner survey. A summary of that is in an appendix. We interviewed almost all of you as board members when we started this process. We did not provide a summary of that in an appendix because we wanted to retain anonymity for that, and that is mistakenly written in the board packet there. And then staff focus groups, held a number of staff focus groups for an analysis retrospectively of where we've come, how it's gone, as well as a SWOT analysis and a PESTEL analysis, which you will also see in the appendix. So all of that was to gather orientation for the process. And then phase 2 was to get focused on those priorities, which you have now seen a few times. You provided some very helpful guidance for us in the fall. The priorities are high-level directions as OWEB thinks about what to lean into, what to give some attention to over the next 5 years. In addition to some of the operational things that were already ongoing, recognizing that there is so much that is happening already, but we're trying to identify the growing edges of the organization strategically. So those are in part 2, the 6 priorities there. The strategy work group worked on that, executive committee shaped that a bit, you reviewed that. And then in the 3rd phase, get moving phase, the staff teams then begin to develop, and they work diligently a few different times in groups to develop some strategies for the priorities. So the priorities are high-level directions, the strategies are how are we going to move forward in those. And we wanted to identify just a handful or less of key strategies for each of the priorities. So we don't get too complicated, but also so that there are multiple ways of moving forward on those. So work groups worked on that, executive team worked on that. You reviewed the first draft of that, but we'd like for you to look at the tactics here today. And then in the red here, still to come is an evaluation plans that are, that we have some initial thought about that, and Audrey will speak to that later. Each of the strategies has a prospectus that the staff has developed around that. We're just bringing forward some high-level ideas for you related to the actions and the outcomes. But behind that is some thinking about who will do it, when will they do it, what kinds of resources will this take, how will we get some data on both the outputs as well as the outcomes. So there's some thinking behind that that we have not brought forward because we wanted to keep this at a strategic level. Perhaps just a few other things to frame our conversation today. The plan is intended to be a refresh, not a from scratch. So just wanted to remind you of that. So you'll see a lot of the ideas that are rooted in the first plan brought forward with some adjustments into this plan. the first plan, the 2019 plan brought forward, the last plan. So in that sense, it's a refresh. And then as Eric described, we wrestled significantly with the idea of ambition in this, recognizing that capacity is an issue. And that was surfaced in interviews with you a number of months ago and continues to be a point of conversation along the way. So we tried to make these strategic plans that we have in front of us moving us forward, but not unrealistic, not so ambitious that it would get us into trouble and overcommit us to things that would compromise the quality of what's happening. So just know that we were really wrestling with that along the way, and you'll see probably read into some of that, the wrestling of ambition. With that in front of you is the part one of the document that you have in front of you, which relates to identity, and that is who we are, and that has four different sets of ideas brought forward from the 2018-2019 plan. We didn't do much adjustment to this at all. The leadership team considered that this was a fairly stable set of ideas that would carry us, it was durable, carry us forward. So these ideas were surfaced through, I think, 6 different regional conversations 5 years ago in Eastern Oregon, the Gorge, Central, Southern, the Coast, and then the Willamette Valley. We brought together groups of people that were partners, grantees, stakeholders, interested parties, and spent a few hours kind of thinking through how we show up, the impact we intend, what we believe, the approach we take. This is a distillation of that was first rendered in the last plan, and we just pulled this forward. So that's the origin story of part one. Part two is the priorities which you have seen before, and that articulates the 6 areas of emphasis and the 6 strategic directions that are very high level. And in your document, you'll see a description of that, some bullet points that just unpack it, not in a comprehensive way, but in a illustrative way, those bullet points, to help remind us what we meant by each of these priorities. So this you've seen before. There are a few adjustments, however, since the last time that we met, particularly around priority 5. We have done some work around that. Which leads us then to part 3. And this is the part that we particularly would like your thoughts and guidance on. For each of these priorities, we have identified some strategies, and then you'll see in your board materials a few different categories in each strategy. Descriptive paragraph, primary objective to respond to the governor's request that we have a SMART goal for each of these. So something specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. So the objective, we tried to capture that in the objective. And then you'll see here a list of core activities. The staff has worked on those. It's not a comprehensive list, but these were some of the key activities that the staff identified as being instrumental in moving forward in this strategy. And then on the right-hand side of this, the key outcomes, what would result from that. So I'm sure you noticed that as you read this through. So we'd like to take a little bit of time just to walk through each of the priorities and the strategies. But we don't have to do this in order. We don't need to do this priority 1 to 6. So if there is a priority that is something that you have some thoughts about, you'd like for us to start with that while our energy is still at the level, we're happy to jump in, whatever order you want to take them, and then we'll work through those. What would be helpful for us is to hear 2 things. One, what you affirm about each of these is helpful for us to hear. If you affirm something, just to know, yes, we're on the right track, it's helpful for us. And then secondly, is there anything that you'd like to suggest to adjust, a recommendation, an omission or an adjustment to make along the way? Chair?
All right, so we're going to take it a slide at a time, right? Is that my understanding? All right, Jamie, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, and I appreciate all the work being done, the overview and the walkthrough. In looking at this in its complete form, I understand that the main focus of today is part 3, but there were 2 things in part 1 that jumped out. So I just want to call those out and offer them for reflection. One, under part 1, identity under our ethic. All the other statements start with a B something. And then we have the consider future Oregonians. So I would just posit that we could say be forward thinking, which essentially captures also the consideration of future Oregonians. And then again, the format of that one point is different. And so it seems to be an inconsistency. But then it seems that we could call out being informed by both Indigenous and historical knowledge, in addition to strengthening traditional partnerships and growing new partnerships with non-traditional partners. This is stuff we talk about later, but it's that opportunity. So yeah, so right in the top left, how we show up, we've got be bold, be transparent, consider future Oregonians, and be curious. So just wanted to suggest we might consider be forward thinking, because then there'll be all be statements. And then when it gets down to the approach that we take under investing, and this is just the high level, but investing in the long-term outcomes, one of the things that struck me that was not called out in that follow-up description was a reference to the long-term view requires understanding and needing to incorporate climate impacts. So that, restoration is not just going back to what was, but we have essentially a changing scenario that we have to incorporate. So again, I know our focus is part 3, but wanted to call those out because I think those might be opportunities to tighten those 2 points up.
Thank you.
Jamie, do you have anything you want to add to part 3?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Bruce?
Yeah. The Colt comment brought this to me, and so this is before we start on this as well. And it'll be, speak now and I will forever hold my peace. To help protect and restore healthy watersheds and natural habitats that support thriving communities and strong economies has been our mission statement for a number of years. Every time I've written it, it bothers me, because we do not have to restore healthy watersheds. Healthy watersheds, we have to protect healthy watersheds. We have to restore non-healthy watersheds. And it's been that way every time. And so when you start talking about restoration and protection, they're 2 different things. I know we don't want to rewrite everything, but perhaps just removing the word healthy in our mission statement, because we address it so many times throughout the strategic plan, and importantly. But if we're protecting and restoring watersheds and natural habitats that support thriving communities and strong economies, to me, it actually makes sense, and it hasn't up to that point. And I'll never say another word about it.
Yeah.
Damn,
I'm sorry.
Liz?
Oh, okay. So going back to the first piece, and it just seems that every time you do a strategic plan, we always want to be bold. And I'm not suggesting that we don't take it out, but I want to give some, how I think about that a little bit, because we really do work on the land, and we execute work on the land. And so for me, being bold is okay, but really, to me, it's like we should be believable, We should do what we say and execute it as we say on the land. And I think that's something that's really important for an entity that manages and works with the community and says, this is what we're going to promise. So it's more about being believable and follow through. And even, in my mind, when we put some bold things out there, to me, I've always rather underpromised and overachieve, so people will stay with us, know that we're sustainable. But I'm okay with bold, because I know that's almost like a requirement. We always have to be bold. But the heart of it is being believable with our communities. I'll just offer that.
Thank you. Stephanie?
One thing, since the strategic plan update is a result of the governor's expectations of state agencies, I wanted to mention that the Department of Administrative Services is responsible to work with agencies to meet the expectations. And I thought you might be wondering, well, what kind of feedback have we gotten about the draft? So I just wanted to relay that Eric Williams and I did meet with the Department of Administrative Services a few weeks ago, and we got glowing feedback on the draft. The person we met with said, I'm not a subject matter expert in this topic whatsoever, but the plan made me want to be involved in watershed restoration in the state. It was just really beautiful and motivational. And she said the actions were specific and measurable. So I just wanted to relay that feedback that we got.
Nice.
Mark Webb?
Yeah, back to the part 3 maybe. I'm just, and this may be a question for the OWEB staff, I'm curious what connect people means, and if that's related to grant awards. And I'm thinking about some rural communities that it's hard to get a number of people involved in that. So just clarification there. And then similarly with increase the use of OWEB's engagement grant offering to do community engagement. That sounds really redundant to me. So is the current engagement grant offering not directed towards community engagement? So
That one's confusing to me too, so I wanted to address.
Okay, I hope I can clear that one up. But first, on the connecting people around watershed work, as our mission is to make grants for watershed restoration and protection, everything in this plan is in support of that goal. And so it's, to use your example, in a rural community, sometimes there's a little bit of work that needs to be done before people are willing, able, and ready to begin doing restoration on their property, because it's, it's their home, it's where they live, it's where they spend their lives, and we need to make sure that people have a good understanding and comfort with what's going to happen if we expect them to participate in restoration projects. And it's not just people that are having projects on their land, however, it's the communities that we work in. That statement, that strategy, and you'll see it in some of the tactics, is also intended to help people maybe that don't have a project on their property understand why we're doing what we're doing and hopefully support it. So that when they see people in their community doing things on the land, making changes on the land, they understand, hopefully, why it's happening and why it's important. To your second point, Mark, around, I think maybe having the word engagement in there twice is what makes that statement confusing, but it's about increasing the use of. It's not saying that our engagement grant's not doing work to support community engagement, because that is the purpose of the engagement offering. And that strategy is around increasing the use of it for that purpose, because we feel, staff feel, and I think some of our partners out there feel, that there is an opportunity to do some of the work, particularly that's hard for our grantee organizations to get funding for, to take the steps needed to do what we were just talking about, to get people ready to put something on the ground. That takes time. It takes a lot of work. I think our grantee organizations probably have the toughest jobs trying to get these projects together. And you can't just, in many cases, go right to, okay, we'll fund a technical assistance design and then get it built. There's a lot of steps before that. And that's what the engagement offering is. And so we wanted to spotlight that in the plan to help people understand the power of it, that it can be used, I think, to address often gaps that grantee organizations have. We talk a lot about capacity to do this work. That offering is a way to help improve capacity to get projects on the ground. And Mark, before you joined the board, this board had a conversation around this offering's previous name. It was previously called stakeholder engagement. And the term stakeholder is not really a positive term for a lot of folks whose land was taken from them where others could stake a claim on it. And so we've taken that word out of our offering, although I noticed we missed it in one of the slides today, so apologies for that. But that's why it's called the engagement grant offering. It used to be called the stakeholder engagement offering, which
I
is
hadn't realized that.
probably a term people are more familiar with.
So this is not a new use, but additional emphasis.
Additional emphasis, helping people understand the power in it, really.
Right.
So how I read number 3 is when it says the grant offerings to do community engagement, it feels like that's, well, OWEB's going to do that. So it doesn't seem like it's the grant offering. So how I read that was that's something that OWEB's going to do the community engagement.
Oh, I see. That is not our intent.
Yeah, that's how I read it.
Because we're just the funder.
Right.
And so those folks in our grantee organizations can take advantage of this offering to fund their community engagement activities.
Okay. So yeah, just a little wordsmithing, but anything? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so this will be a bit awkward for me. So I really appreciate the comment about stakeholder engagement. I won't use it again that way. What I am concerned about, and it's not to change things, is this is a reflection of BMFP's attempt to engage with tribes on public lands with a veg focus. Given certain kind of government-to-government relations and the like, they don't consider themselves in the same way a part of the community that many of our other people do. And I don't know that that needs to be addressed here. But again, I wouldn't want a whole lot to write on what community means, just as long as it's really, really broadly understood. And it doesn't become a technical term or a problematic term like stakeholder.
Thank you for that. Yes, our intent is to define community as broadly as anyone wants to, really.
All right, anybody else on this one? All right, thank you.
Priority 2, engage the diversity of Oregonians in watershed enhancement work. So this is, even though DEI is woven through all of this, this is our priority that is very intentional about diversity. So 3 strategies here, and then you can read in the board packet the tactics as well. What do you affirm, and what recommendations do you have for these?
Go ahead, Mark Webb.
So what would be an example in strategy 2.3 of an organization that hasn't traditionally been involved in watershed restoration, just as an example?
Thanks for the question. An example I could give there is if you just simply look at demographic information and you take Malheur County, and I think maybe my numbers are a little bit outdated, but I think 30% of the population in Malheur County is Hispanic.
Right.
Have we engaged them in watershed restoration work in Malheur County? I don't know. Is there a way to engage them? Also, I don't know. But there may be opportunities there and in many other places around the state to engage communities that we haven't worked with before.
Stephanie.
Oh, sure. Just to add to that, the OWEB board has challenged the agency leadership to do outreach to at least 3 non-traditional partners per quarter. And so some of the groups that we've reached out to represent communities of color or just other folks that we haven't worked with before, and they are starting to explore getting into watershed restoration work and then partnering with some of the more traditional partners that the agency works with.
Bruce.
Does strategy 2.1 include all, are there any parts of the draft resolution that we'll be voting on in July that are not covered in strategy 2.1?
Bruce, I don't believe that there are items from that are not in here, because we very intentionally took the language from the resolution, as we did with the climate resolution as well, to incorporate it. I'm sounding a little bit hesitant because there may be one kernel of something in there that maybe we didn't, but our intent certainly was to include everything in the tactics in this plan.
All right, anybody else on this slide? Go ahead, Stephanie.
I'll just note that I did cross-check the resolution, and I would say, yes, they do mirror each other, but I would also say the resolution's a little more timeless, and this is more time-bound, so there may not be 100% agreement there.
Jamie, your hand is up.
Yeah, Stephanie, I know you were talking about the work you're doing, and I know this has been ongoing work for you. One of the things we have in earlier comments is this concept of engaging directly and indirectly through our partners. I know that's incorporated in some of how we've drafted up our grants and a consideration for allocation of grants. But I was wondering, Eric, this may be, I guess, a question for you. Could you just speak to how, even if there's not a direct, there's more of some of that indirect impact we're engaging people in, even if it's not directly through OWEB, but through some of our partner grants?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. One of the ways that we've done that, and I think it's a little bit challenging, but I think we'll continue to try to find ways to do that with other groups as well. We had reported to you for several successive open solicitation award every 6 months, the open solicitation awards, the tribal roles in grants. And it wasn't necessarily that a tribe was an applicant for those grants, but we dug through the information in them and looked at grant applications where tribes had a role as a partner, an active partner, but they weren't necessarily the grantee. And when we did that tabulation, we found that tribal engagement in projects led to projects that had a higher success rate of getting funded. So that's an example of the kind of work we can do. I think I might turn to my colleague Audrey here to see, because this gets into how we're going to measure progress on these tactics, if you've got additional response for that, Audrey.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Board Member McLeod-Skinner. Just a little bit of a thought, and this comes up on a couple of these strategies and tactics. We're proposing a refresh for the next few years. We're bringing in new concepts and kind of bolding and underlining some of the existing concepts. And this is a great example of one for which we have very little baseline information. So we really don't have a good sense of what our restoration partners are doing. We don't necessarily track all of that. So I think this is a nice tie-in to hopefully some improved reporting. Not that we'll ever be able to cover or account for everything, but by defining this as one of the tactics and strategies for the refresh, then we'll build that baseline and be able to add to that as we go.
Thank you. And just to clarify, under strategy 2.2, is that second bullet key outcome that's included in that? Because Eric, I really appreciate you mentioning especially that reference, that data point. And there were several board members who commented when that was reported out, how helpful that was to really see that piece. And then the other thing I've heard from staff is, sometimes we have newer groups that don't have the experience, but by being partners, they can build that experience to provide the opportunity in the future, potentially for an independent application.
One other tactic I'll mention that is in here is we have a tactic to basically work with our FIP partnerships and start having those partnerships mentor each other. Because we've learned a lot about partnership dynamics through implementation of that program, and each partnership has different challenges that they're facing. And we think there's some real potential there for partnerships that maybe have experienced that same kind of challenge that can help other partnerships, talk through them. And so we do have very specific tactics that are along those lines of what you're addressing here, Jamie.
Oh, and apologies, Chair. If I can, one other thing that's come up before that I've recommended that I don't know if it's captured in this, when we talk about our technical review teams, is whether or not we could include as a member of our technical review team, someone with this expertise in community, especially in diverse communities in that region, so that the review of an application includes both the technical aspects, but if this is a goal and this is one of the objectives we want to achieve, are we including someone with that local or regional expertise in our review committee to be included in that consideration? Because one of the gaps that sometimes comes up in our conversations on reviewing applications is there was the technical aspects of the application, but there seems to be that input missing at that stage before a recommendation comes to the board.
Stephanie.
Go ahead, Eric. I think you were going to say the same thing I'm going to say.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. But Jamie, we do have built into here increasing the diversity on both TRTs and the board itself. And what we have to make sure that we're paying attention to is in our technical review teams to make sure we're staying focused on the evaluation criteria that are in the rules. And so we do need to stick to that and make sure that when our reviewers are looking at applications, their comments are directly addressing the evaluation criteria that you've adopted.
Mark Webb?
Sorry, when you
Can you speak into the mic, Mark? Thank you.
when you gave the example of the Hispanic population in Malheur County, that was helpful. I wouldn't think of them as an organization. So I'm wondering if it's too fussy to say something other than organization or something with organization. So I'm fine if you keep it, but it didn't strike me that the population itself would be, or individuals.
Thank you. I have a comment that might be helpful. When we get into priority 5 regarding urban and working lands, that might also be a place to raise this point. It might help.
Liz, did you have something you wanted to add?
No.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Got covered.
All right, not seeing any more. Move on, please.
Priority 3, strengthen and leverage community capacity to achieve healthy watersheds. We have 2 strategies here. The first is one that we have had before. The second is a bit different. And then in your board packet, you can see the details of the tactics there as well, as including the key outcomes.
Anybody have anything they want to add on to this one or comment? Jamie, your hand is up.
More of a question. One of the things when we get part of the conversation in our last meeting was this piece about the working lands piece, and there was the comment, and I know this is coming up in an upcoming priority of working with landowners, but there's also other members. This might tie into Mark's comment as well. There's traditional landowners, and then there is other members of the community that do tie into that are key also to long-term stability of healthy watersheds and investment in healthy watersheds. So even folks who live in an area, impact the ecosystem, but don't actually own land there. It seems like this would be that priority area. And so is there a way to better incorporate, or are the outcomes that are listed ways that we're incorporating that goal and that objective because it may not be an individual group that gets funded, or if staff could, if Eric, if you and your team could just speak to that aspect in this area, because like on the training and some of those other things, it seems that from previous meetings we've been told that there's limits to how we can invest in this aspect.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Let me test this with you. I think what you're doing is linking priorities 2 and 3. And some of the specific tactics we have in the strategies under priority 2 are talking about communities more broadly. Whereas this one, because again, we're a grant-making agency, we provide grants to a certain list of eligible entities. This one really is about those entities that get projects on the ground. But I think your point is well taken, because you kind of need to do the things in strategy 2 to make the outcomes better in strategy 3, if that makes sense, unless I'm misunderstanding your question.
No, I appreciate your response.
Dan Shively.
Yeah, so I'm trying to get my head around strategy 3 as it relates to community capacity, dealing with problem solving, collaboration, negotiations, right? Like a lot of times, different parts of the community are just in different places. And do some of the tactical components under 3.2, some of the core activities get to training and workshops that help communities really increase their social capacity towards building healthier watersheds? And it may, I just can't tell, it seems more technical, informational, here's how the grant processes work. And could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, we're all nodding in agreement with you here, Dan. And, I think it's true that this is more focused on trying to get at the capacity needs we hear about over and over again. Some of it related to turnover in staffing, hard to keep, full board membership active, hard to simply sustain the ongoing activities in addition to projects on the ground. And so given our limitations constitutionally to fund the capacity in our organizations, we're trying to highlight here other ways that might help improve local capacity. And I can see in reading through this that what you're talking about is a potential gap in these tactics. Audrey, Steve, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. Just to add from my point of view, I think you're right on in that the focus around helping provide information on technical topics relevant to the subjects of OWEB's grant making and the grant making process has been the focus, because that's really the emphasis of the agency as a grant making agency versus a place to solve all the natural resources problems. That's from my point of view, what I've heard.
And it does also harken back to our conversation about the engagement grant offering and the ability for our eligible grantees to use that offering to have those kind of conversations in a community maybe where they don't have consensus around certain strategies. A common one is on dam removal, that you often don't have consensus on that when you first start out working on exploration of removing a dam. And so that grant offering that we have had for a while now, almost, 8 years, that can be used to fund some of that work.
I'll just make one follow-up comment. If the Forest Service runs a number of these collaboratives, right, across the landscape, kind of the terrestrial component, if you will, to watershed councils focusing on aquatic. That said, there's so much interrelationship there. If there were one training, I would ask to consider or, have our collaboratives really go through its interest-based negotiation training, which has nothing to do with kind of what I'm seeing on the board here, but a lot more about how to bring folks together to find that middle ground. And that's when, as we've experienced, we see great things happen in our watersheds. Communities coming together, rallying around a cause, putting aside their differences, and working towards healthy watersheds. Thanks.
All right, anybody have any other comments or questions on this slide? All right, can move on.
Priority 4 of 6. We're making progress. Advanced learning about watershed restoration effectiveness through coordinated monitoring. We put learning front and center in this priority. And then 3 strategies beneath that are related to priority 4. Again, the tactics and the actions are considerable. Here in your board packet, you can see the details of that as well as key outcomes. Now, what do you affirm, and are there recommendations you have for this one?
Bruce?
What is a specific funding opportunity?
Can you orient me more to your question, Bruce?
It's the first sentence of strategy 4.1. We will continue to invest in specific funding opportunities for monitoring.
Yeah, thanks. I would comment OWEB monitoring grants and monitoring around particular programs such as the Focused Investment Partnership and a budget line item quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes.
So the funding opportunity is not in and of itself a grant? Or is it?
I think of it as a suite of grants. So it's saying, monitoring funding is offered throughout, OWEB has the charge of monitoring effectiveness of all of our programs. And so it's intending to kind of continue that and emphasize that and demonstrate the relation of that to priority 4.
Stephanie?
I think this is support-specific set-asides in our spending plan for monitoring as opposed to a more general grant offering where monitoring was one of the types of eligible projects. We are specifically setting monitoring as an item in our spending plan because of its importance. I think that's what this is trying to say.
Yes, it's affirming that.
Yeah.
So when we make decisions on spending plan, one of the biggest decisions we make, I'm just curious how we apply this to those decisions we make. It's easy when you're just looking at a monitoring grant. You say, yes, we did it. But I like where we're going with it. It's confusing to me on how you get there with this wording.
Yeah, and just a quick comment, that open solicitation monitoring grants are initiated by grantees, whereas the other kind of suite of programs that we're referring to are aligned with the particular program to help monitor effectiveness of the Focused Investment Partnership, for example, or to do that landscape level effectiveness monitoring under the quantifying outcomes budget line item. So there is that responsive and that forward-thinking component that's different in the different monitoring grant programs.
So what is the decision we're going to be asked to make in the spending plan to achieve this?
There are several line items in there. You'll see a line item in the FIP program for effectiveness monitoring. You'll see a line item in the open solicitation section of the spending plan for effectiveness monitoring. And I think this is one other place, Audrey.
Quantifying conservation.
Quantifying.
For this to work, it will have to be applied a number of times as we consider the spending plan.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. Mark Webb? Can you put the microphone, please?
Sorry. So this may be a conversation I can have with some OWEB staff folks later, but I like this. I just don't know what is meant by effectiveness monitoring that y'all are talking about or what coordinated means. And I know for our VEG program with my organization, monitoring is absolutely key to moving these projects ahead in an important way. And I'm just wondering what kind of consistent monitoring plan you have, or do we just award grants to people who say they're going to monitor? And that could be a conversation some other time. I mean, I like this. I just wonder what it means.
Yeah, thanks. I can add a few comments there. So a big distinction I heard in your question, I would say the OWEB monitoring grant, open solicitation OWEB monitoring grant program is responsive, is evaluating projects that are brought, that folks apply for. But when we say effectiveness monitoring, we're kind of distinguishing the effectiveness of restoration actions as compared to, status and trend monitoring of a particular variable. And so we're meeting both the open solicitation kind of responsive grant making program, but also the more programmatic effectiveness monitoring. That's that quantifying conservation outcomes component of the spending plan. And the FIP effectiveness monitoring. So I would say it would be great to chat more about that. And when we say, just to underscore, effectiveness monitoring means, are the actions that we're funding in, accomplishing the intended restoration objectives writ large?
One follow-up. I don't know if it belongs here or somewhere else or nowhere, but I think from EQC's perspective or DEQ's perspective, it'd really be nice if we could somehow align what's going on here with meeting TMDLs. And I know it's different agencies, but I do think OWEB's funded work, to the extent that it's effective, should actually positively address the TMDLs, and I think it should be in a strategic plan.
And another comment, Mark, to your question about coordinated and why is that in bold in the priority 4 title? Because just to underscore the importance of coordination in monitoring, since OWEB is a grant-making agency, the water quality data, the fish habitat data that's used to evaluate that restoration effectiveness, none of that data is owned by the OWEB agency. It's the state of Oregon's data. So there are a number of interagency teams that come together to look at the outcomes from those investments. And so really advancing and continuing that coordinated effort is a big part of what's meant here in priority 4.
Yeah, and I would add specifically with respect to TMDLs, our applications ask a question. Is this project in a 303D listed water body? And then in technical review, TMDLs come up an awful lot. Our reviewers are often commenting on, well, the TMDL requires X, Y, Z in this watershed, and here's how this project could address that TMDL. I think it gets a little more challenging on larger river systems that have a TMDL when your project is on such a small piece of that watershed.
Sure.
Like the Malheur River is huge, but we're often doing a project on, a 60-acre field. But it still comes into the conversation and information. A good application is going to have the information about that TMDL in it and talk about how this project is playing a role in implementing the TMDL.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie and then Mark Labhart.
Yeah, this is more understand the language and what's intended by, but even that point, Eric, that you were just mentioning, I'm wondering under 4.1 if that's the increased restoration efficiencies across the state enterprise could incorporate the concept that Mark raised about how data is targeted or captured. But I also was curious on that section. It calls out the John Day River project specifically, and it says other projects across the state. So I'm assuming that the incorporating learnings is across the state. It's not just the John Day project, but I was just curious again why that was called out specifically. And then the last point or the other question is, I don't know if it's tied into what you've remarked on in this section, but last meeting we were talking about there were a lot of different funding opportunities across the board, and it seems it would be too much for OWEB to take on that responsibility of being able to be a warehouse for that, of those different grant opportunities. But is that part of what's referenced here? So could that potentially be funding that's given to an agency to do that, or is that part of what's meant by some of the points reference that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I'll respond. Thank you, Board Member McLeod-Skinner. Actually, earlier we talked about kind of a suite of grant programs and the spending plan. One of those is quantifying conservation outcomes, and a lot of funding for the intensively monitored watersheds effort in the John Day came from that line item. And a large amount of information has been synthesized, actually over 15 years, and is kind of being pulled together now. And OWEB has invested staff and in dollars in that effort to understand effectiveness monitoring. So it's just one example to try to add some tangible examples to a topic. But yes, absolutely, the intent is to look at effectiveness monitoring at important restoration issues that are relevant across the state. And then speaking about kind of coordinated data and perhaps the housing of data into a warehouse or repository, that concept has been raised a number of times. Currently, the most relevant effort would be the Oregon Water Data Portal, which is a DEQ-led effort with OWEB and other agencies as partners. Although a lot of the natural resources data that is generated through OWEB grants and other efforts is available publicly, it is very challenging to find water data. It's challenging for users and for different nonprofit groups and citizens and customers of the state. So there are conversations about how to provide that information better.
Mark Labhart.
Thank you, Barbara. So I just want to add a little more weight to what Eric's comments were and Stephanie's comments. We have to be really careful that we don't go down a slippery slope of putting in one agency's criteria like TMDL, because Water Resources has a bunch of criteria, ODF&W has a bunch of criteria, Department of Forestry has a whole bunch of criteria. And I think it's covered pretty adequately in what Eric said with coordination. When an application comes in for monitoring, it has to be coordinated with various agencies, but listing a specific agency's action in a TMDL, as a TMDL, for example, in a strategic plan, somebody's going to say, well, where's ODF&W's? Because we have a number of policies and strategies too. So you need to be really careful about listing one agency over another there.
Thank you. Bruce, and then Dan Chidley.
I would like to affirm, are we at 4.2 now? Did we move to that yet?
Anything at 4.
Okay. I would like to affirm what's in 4.2 and ask the question, I'm concerned that we may be leaving out non-federally recognized tribes, that some of our soil and water conservation districts are working with, like the Clatsop and the Chinook tribe. So while I like everything in here, how do we be careful that we can include indigenous knowledge from other sources in addition to our federally recognized tribes in the Nez Perce?
Thanks, Bruce. I think what I would say in response to that is, again, these tactics are near-term foreseeable future. And I think we want to be respectful and careful about doing this kind of engagement properly. And I think we're just not prepared to sit here and map out a process to do that kind of engagement with non-federally recognized tribes right now. However, if we have an application that comes in where someone's partnering with a non-federally recognized tribe, and they've imparted that knowledge in framing up their project, I think that is also squarely hitting at this goal and would be evaluated in a similar way. But in terms of our specific engagement, we would start with the federally recognized tribes and make sure that we understand fully the implications of doing engagement beyond that before we start doing it.
Dan Shiley?
No.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to 4.1, and I think it's in here, but it's just not coming through clearly for me. I think a lot about our investments in monitoring, learning. Over the decades, we've been doing aquatic and watershed restoration and practices. One even cited here, the stage 0 related work at first was thought to be quite risky. And we've done a lot of learning around that. So what I'm looking for is increasing knowledge and awareness around our different practices. Being intentional around not just funding the monitoring and learning from it, but being bold, if you will, in new innovations. Thinking back to taking wood out of streams, then we put it back in, and then we learned about how to put it in different configurations. It's more natural with a floodplain, to all these different, if folks remember back when we started supplementing salmon carcasses in streams, many people were skeptical. Until we learned collectively through the science and the monitoring that was an important part of the nutrient cycle. So I don't know, maybe some verbiage in the opening paragraph and it might be there, but it keeps coming back to the effectiveness piece. And I think it's more than just that. It's about shared learning, shared knowledge, awareness, the innovations that we don't even know about today that we'll learn about a decade or two from now.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, Board Member Shively. And I would connect what I hear in your comment to actually to strategy 4.3, and also to, I think, maybe even our last priority around being bold, but also evaluating our response. But just to expand a little bit on 4.3, communicate data-driven outcomes. A lot of what is being referred to there is the board's Telling the Restoration Story grant offering that funds long-term examples of restoration investments that have some data associated with them to demonstrate that learning, but to produce outreach products that can be shared with practitioner audience or others engaging in similar work. So there's also a connection from this kind of data-driven outreach products and telling the restoration story back to priority 1, which is broad awareness. But to some of the earlier conversation under this priority, it's important that this telling the restoration story example really have that data behind it. It is funded through the quantifying conservation outcomes item in the spending plan. Just a couple connections there. Thank you.
Liz?
So, gosh, I see a real difference between 4.2 and 4.3 because we're in a very Western-based science. 4.3 continues to make a lot of sense, and we will rely on a lot of data. But I see in 4.2, knowledge is not often written. It's not often numbers. It's very different, right? And I'm going back to a comment I think it was last meeting, and Liza Jane was talking about the wisdom of grandmothers, the wisdom of not just tribal grandmothers, indigenous grandmothers, but all grandmothers and elders. So to me, if we could make learning and monitoring as broad and as an interpretation as we can, I think that's really important. And, I think we really have to feel our way because we'll want to do 4.2 and 4.3, right? And that'll be a new path for us. And so how do we balance that? How do we weigh that? So that's my thought. I don't know, Lindsay or Kelly, if you have thoughts on that?
I don't have direct thoughts. I like the way that you framed it, that we will want to do both. But remind me, where do we talk about different ways of knowing? That's in there somewhere.
I know, I think it is.
Yeah, 4.2. And just a comment that I concur we can do, I think the intent of the agency is to do all of these simultaneously. And we do currently have a Telling the Restoration Story grant under consideration that looks at traditional ecological knowledge.
Yeah, the language in 4.2, indigenous knowledge and different ways of understanding watersheds, was written intentionally to, I guess, incorporate the grandmas out there.
And the elders.
Mark Webb, your
back.
microphone.
I wanted to go back to Mark Laphart's point, so I appreciate it. Don't put TMDLs in or stuff, but I think that raises a bigger issue. We're not talking about other state agencies here, are we? So my frustration, and I think many rural practitioners' frustration, is that different state agencies have different criteria for what satisfies restoration or water quality and the like. So I do feel like it would be incumbent on OWEB to engage with the state, other state agencies, and those agencies to engage likewise to begin to develop a unified vision, because that's going to make restoration work easier and more effective and at least arguably less costly. So I appreciate what Mark said, but I think it actually highlights a bigger issue here, that the agencies are often operating with different conceptions, and that makes it really hard for people on the ground.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Thanks, Eric. And just a comment, I also wanted to add back to Board Member Labhart's comment that as well as looking at whether our projects are in an area that is water quality listed or water quality impaired, we also look at whether a project is in an area but would provide benefit to listed species habitat. And the FIP, Focused Investment Partnership Ecological Priorities, refer to Oregon Conservation Strategy species and habitats.
And back to Mark's comment on different agencies' interpretations of TMDLs. We do regularly coordinate with, it had been Gene Foster until he retired, of course, and his successors at DEQ. And I think probably just as importantly for the structure of our program, one of our evaluation criteria for restoration projects is what are the conservation plans that this project is implementing? And for water quality projects, the TMDL plan is the ultimate answer. And so our reviewers are looking for that when they're evaluating grant applications.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, not seeing any.
Priority 5, increase connection of urban and working lands to watershed health. There are 3 strategies related to the priority 5, promote value of multi-benefit watershed projects, promote value, increase connection of urban and working lands to watershed health, and support and fund grantees building or expanding partnerships with urban constituencies. And you'll see, again, tactics and key outcomes. What do you affirm and what do you recommend?
Jamie?
So to the point of so much of this is a balance. And I remember this being a specific ask to add and the opportunity on, I'm looking at specifically 5.3 of expanding the partnerships with urban constituencies. The one thing that comes up as the good, of course, expanded partnerships, the one concern it brings up potentially is, are we shifting funds away from parts of the state that have no or few other funding mechanisms to areas that may have multiple potential sources of funding? So it's a balance on the two. Again, I think it's a great idea to have this and to expand that, but is there a concern, or how are we factoring in when we're looking at these applications that the fact that 2 potentially co-equal projects, one in a rural area might not have any other funding options, and one in an urban area may have other funding options?
Thanks, Jamie. I was pondering that one for a longer second than normal. It's a good point. And, I think where things stand now, when our review teams are looking at applications, they're going to rank them in terms of the ones that get the most ecological benefit for the dollar. And our past discussions with the board on this had to do with the reality that in many cases, we have seen urban projects come in where the technical review team looks at it and says, this is a valid, legitimate project. The costs are so high because of the infrastructure constraints and so on, for whatever the ecological benefit is smaller typically than if you're spending the same amount of money in an area that doesn't have those constraints. And so we're trying to thread that needle, that balance, as you say, to figure out how can we best support groups. And I think the reality is I'm not sure that it's easier to get funding for restoration in urban areas than in rural. In fact, I think it's actually harder. And that's why we're seeing these really expensive projects that come in. There aren't a lot of funding sources to turn to address, let's say, capital intensive stormwater infrastructure projects to treat stormwater before it goes into a river. Many cities do have stormwater utilities, but that's limited, and they're limited in how much funds they can raise. There aren't a lot of other funding sources in the way that there are funding sources from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and from NOAA for projects that often happen in rural areas. And so I think I'd want to think a little bit more about the premise on that before making any changes here.
No, if I may just follow up on that, I'm specifically thinking, I mentioned being at Sustainability Fair in Lake Oswego, and there was one group that was working on invasive weeds. And of course, we do that throughout the state and invest in that. And so I'm wondering, in the earlier parts of the strategic plan, it was talking about leveraging partnerships. Is there a role or an opportunity to be in partnership, not just with other state agencies, but potentially with more local or regional agencies, counties, to help, all I'm thinking is help to advocate that there be some funding and resources spent. Because I'm thinking on some of these opportunities, like parks and recreation components of urban areas can overlap in some of this work, and there may be a city or a county budget for that ties in. But that would involve some of the partnership and some of the advocacy. The example you gave, I think, is straight up a unique and a standalone, where you're actually talking about some of that infrastructure. And I'm thinking about some of these other types of projects as well. There's not a solution at this point. I just wanted to flag because I think it's going to be a challenge going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. You will have one of those projects before you tomorrow, an open solicitation from the city of Salem that they're investing in some habitat work within the city on Minto Brown Island, but they do need more help to get the work done. But yes, you're correct that they're thinking about it, they're investing in it. They do have local capacity to implement, and just need some help from OWEB to get over the line.
Bruce?
I think there are going to be a lot of longer conversations concerning benefit/co-benefit as we go forward through the years. I mean, benefits are very specifically delineated in Measure 76 funds. We can only fund for certain benefits. And yet we talk about the co-benefits of these projects on a regular basis. I mean, we value them, and but how we rank them, and if we can rank them, and plus other forms of money that are other funds that come in that don't have the same restrictions as Measure 76, co-benefits may become more important or more decisive in how we evaluate plans. So I see this as, I affirm what we've done. I think it's good, but I think we're going to have, as time goes by, when we talk about benefits, co-benefits, it's going to engender a great deal more conversation and decision-making for the staff and the board.
Agree.
Dan Brown?
Thanks, Barbara. I'd just affirm 5.2 and the kind of tasks and details under that. I think it addresses a couple things other folks have said about connecting with rural partners and building that trust. And I think back to the meeting in K Falls where some of the landowners were there and talking about how them kind of taking that risk to come out and connect led to others connecting and just sort of building on that kind of momentum. I'm affirming that I think that's what this gets to, and I think it's a really good, powerful strategy.
It is what the intent is there, and I talked to those same folks at that meeting, and it was quite powerful, and the kind of thing that's humbling, I think, to me personally, and powerful in that it demonstrates the impact of this work.
Mark Webb?
So I had the same concern that Jamie raised, so I just want to hear you say that a number of urban areas that have a much larger tax base and all kinds of opportunities in terms of revenue generation that a lot of rural communities don't, frequently don't have the money that's needed to do this work. I mean, that changes how I feel about it. I'm just surprised, so I just want to hear you say it again.
I think that what I said earlier is I don't think that there are as many other funding sources, non-OWEB funding sources for habitat projects, water quality projects in urban areas as there are available in rural areas. Through the numerous federal agency programs that are out there, and we hear about them all the time through the course of our conversations here. I think what you see in the urban areas, yes, there's federal money for water and sewer improvements, often not enough. Look at all the water systems that are in the news right now that don't have money to fix the infrastructure problems that they have. But to go beyond that, to address lack of tree canopy cover in low-income neighborhoods, there often isn't money for that kind of thing. Those are projects we probably could fund if there's a connection to, a temperature-limited stream in an area. But the communities generally don't allocate funds, their limited funds, to projects like that. And there don't appear to be as many funds from other sources as there are to do the kind of work that we partner on in farm and forest land.
Thanks. That's interesting.
All right. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Barbara. I think I brought this up in one of our last strategic plan conversations, but we use the term working lands a lot, and I'm just wondering, is there a definition around that we're utilizing? Does that include, say, state forest or federal forest as well? Or are we talking just like private ag?
No, it does include forest land, and there is a definition of working lands that was in the Natural and Working Lands Bill that is referenced somewhere in this document. I was looking for it and I couldn't find where we referenced it, but I believe it's in there, and if it's not, we'll make sure we put it back in there because it is a term that maybe has different meanings to different people, and we want to make sure that the reader is clear on what we mean.
Yeah, all right, thanks, Eric.
All right, any other questions, comments on this slide? All right, moving forward.
Priority 6, take bold and innovative action toward climate resilience. We wrestled with this a bit. You probably can see it in the strategies. To what extent OWEB should aspire to being bold and innovative going forward, given capacity and all the current responsibilities. So settled on 2 strategies: increase grant-making tolerance for bold and innovative action, and 6.2, articulate what restoration is already doing to promote climate resiliency, placing climate resiliency in the bold and innovative space there. What do you affirm, and what recommendations might you have?
I have a question, just nothing, just trying to get my thoughts together on 6.1. There's a lot of work out there, and a lot of landscape to cover just with getting resilience and reinstating a natural fire regime. So to me, the boldness is about the pace and scale, getting larger. So I would kind of lean into that because we know the work ahead is vast, but it's sort of proven, so is it innovative? So I'm trying to think, there's a huge challenge out there, but how do we think it's not innovative? Because we know that it probably is a thing we need to do. So that's where I'm just trying to figure that out a little bit. Are we trying to, freeze icebergs? I mean, there's actually people, really smart people trying to figure out how to do that. And so that's where, I don't know if we're just combining so many things in that or not. So what are we thinking is really bold and innovative?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Liz, and I would agree that pace and scale, in addition to the thing itself, can be considered bold and innovative, and I think we've seen examples of that. You've seen the Stage Zero telling the restoration story. If you go back 10 years in time, there were some nibbles at that, a lot of skepticism, a lot of people upset about sedimentation that it caused in a few project examples. We've gotten past that to understand the value in it when you're resetting a floodplain like that. And I think we're headed that direction with process-based restoration right now, where there's, I think, a general acknowledgement now that pace and scale needs to pick up if we're going to try to hold water higher in watersheds for a longer part of the season. In terms of how does that play out in specific projects, I think we see it sometimes in the scale of activity that's happening. In our John Day FIP in the 30 Mile Creek watershed, they have implemented process-based restoration on 60 miles of stream. That's scaling up in a big way. It doesn't happen overnight, and they've been working at it for a long, long time with some really extraordinary individuals, Herb Winters and Roger Lathrop over there in Gillum County. And so, it takes a little bit of that magic of people with the right know-how and ability to communicate what that vision is for the landscape and getting landowners on board. In that watershed, Herb said at the Connect conference, they've got plenty of landowners ready and willing to have this work done on their property. Their limitation now is getting hung up on permitting to get things built on the ground. And so anyway, a little bit of a diversion, but to illustrate your point that pace and scale, I think, is just as important as the item itself, particularly with respect to climate resilience. It has to happen everywhere if we're going to address the challenge.
Thank you.
So I got Bruce, then Aaron, then Mark Labhart, then Dan Shively.
In your Appendix D, the one section that I think got the most ambivalent and was about bold and innovative. It was all over the board as far as what people think bold and innovative means. And it's some people, based upon that, it may be time for us to rethink whether those are the terms we want to use to describe this section of our strategic plan. What is bold for some? When you talk about pace and scale, scope, those are all pretty easy to quantify. Well, they are, they're quantifiables, but bold isn't. And so we've got that in. I know it sounds good. Everybody wants to be bold, but maybe that's not the right term we should be using for this section.
Thanks, Bruce. I think we'll put some thought to that, and maybe next time we come back, we'll talk a little bit more.
Aaron, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my initial take when I saw this was, I feel like we're not, well, notwithstanding Bruce's comment, because I think that's a great point there of what is bold and innovative, but my interpretation is that this should be taking credit for OWEB already being bold and innovative. I think in many ways, you're pushing the envelope out there for a lot of partners, and you're already doing this. I think at least when it comes to 6.1, for sure. So if you want to be bolder and more innovative and include that in the strategy, that's great. But I also think you should, right? I think even just saying continuing to do these things to support innovation would be great. Thank you.
Mark Labhart?
I was going to add on to Liz's comment, and then Bruce kind of beat me to the punch a little bit, but maybe I would propose in 6.1 deleting tolerance, because I think, what? When I read that. So I would propose maybe increase grant making pace and scale for bold and innovative action. In other words, when I read grant making tolerance, I'm going, well, what do you mean we're going to be tolerant of one or the other? But if we say what Liz was arguing, or not arguing, making a point of, increasing grant making pace and tolerance. In other words, we want to speed it up, or pace and scale. We want to speed it up and increase it for bold and innovative action. So I would like to think about that wording as staff mulls it over.
Dan Shively?
Yeah, thanks for drawing the connection earlier that you made, one of my previous comments. This is tough. And I'm sure staff struggled with each one of these priorities and then the linkage between them. One comment or thought to share here around priority 6, and you touched on it, Eric, and it's this nexus between the doing and the regulatory side of things. And I cited in my updates earlier today, kind of the progress that the greater we, the state and federal agencies have made around finding this collective leader's intent around being bold to embrace use of prescribed fire and protecting human health, right? And that couldn't have been done without a shared leader's intent. And perhaps being even more bold here is to call out in the core activities, train, facilitate, encourage review teams, OWEB staff, regulatory agencies, and grantees. You know, it's this nexus between doing something big and bold and bumping up against a Clean Water Act threshold, an ESA threshold, a Clean Air Act threshold, right? And we deal with this all the time that prevents us from doing things, whether it's an innovative action that we have uncertainty around, i.e., you know, what's our risk tolerance, versus really pushing the boundaries on pace and scale to Liz's point earlier. So somehow I think that it's missing, but it's almost there. Yeah.
Jamie, and then Mark Webb.
Yeah, appreciate the conversation on this this priority. So, you know, stepping back, I know in looking at the feedback we received, there was some concerns about language and how we were moving forward on this. But I really think this is such a common shared goal, especially with those who own and manage our working lands. I mean, this is talking about long-term viability of our working lands and our natural resources. And it's also, frankly, the expectation of younger Oregonians. I hear this all the time. So I think having this and just, you know, tweaking it to get it right and to make sure the clarity is there is really important. A couple a couple of thoughts that came up both when I read it and people's comments. One is a question about, under the primary objective, it says, over the next 3 to 5 years, develop a philosophy of. It seems to me that when we passed the climate resolution, that philosophy was established. I can see over the next 3 to 5 years implementing or actualizing that philosophy, but the way it's written makes it seem like we're thinking about maybe coming up with that philosophy. To me, the action the board took a couple of years ago said that is the philosophy, and now how do we do it is what's really before us. I think in terms of some of the other comments being made, maybe a philosophy of continuous learning, because we only know what we know now, but as we keep learning new things, that can be incorporated into the work we're doing, and continuous learning is what OWEB does anyway, so it would be a natural thing to incorporate. I really agree with Mark's recommendation to remove the word tolerance. And, if there is a sense that there's concern of some Oregonians, then there might be ways to do that. But I don't think as a strategy, I think that word takes us a step back rather than moves us forward. Bruce mentioned the term bold and raised that question of what does that mean? Well, maybe, and also then I think Aaron mentioned we're already bold. So maybe the way to capture that is to say, recognize as a state and regional leader. If that's the standard, we're there in some areas, we're not, we're still learning and growing in other areas. And again, that sense of continuous learning, as others catch up, then we're still in the forefront of that, that status of leaning into the challenge of making sure we're on the forefront of that and pushing the envelope. And then lastly, there was a point under the key outcomes that says the application evaluation consideration will be reviewed and revised as needed. If you could just either Audrey or Eric kind of clarify what is meant by that. I'm assuming that means that as we learn more, that allows us to achieve this bold or leaning into new opportunities or better ways of doing this. But if you could just clarify that's the intent there, as opposed to, I just want to, as opposed to making sure we're not taking a step back on this commitment.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. That key outcome that you read, that is tied to the activity bullet that says assess and refine the lenses applied during application reviews to accommodate bold and innovative actions. And so what that's talking about is we have our evaluation criteria established in rule. And are there things that we can do working with our review teams to maybe shine a spotlight or a lens on those existing criteria that we have? Is that a method we can use to improve actions toward climate resilience? And the key outcome there is that we will have done the review, and the revised word there is, if need be, do we need to revise our evaluation criteria? We would come back to the board and say, we've been talking about looking at climate resilience through a particular lens, and maybe we found that our current evaluation criteria don't get us there, and so we would have to come back to the board and address the rule. So that's what it's referring to in the outcome, is that we will at least have reviewed our evaluation considerations, and if need be, come back to the board for revisions.
Mark Webb?
Are we still on time?
We're doing good.
Oh, I was just teasing. I was going to ask a lot of questions. So one reason I like tolerant and bold, and maybe it's y'all clarifying what you were thinking. I didn't think you were thinking pace and scale, although that makes a ton of sense. I thought you were talking about doing something that's really quite different than what we've been doing before. Might be plausible, but some people are concerned about the risk, and there's no consensus. It's the sort of thing that Dan was talking about. And the two examples I have from our work is, one, we would like to be a lot more aggressive in riparian and thinning, because the science, for the most part, seems to support that that's going to increase the aquatic food web and the deciduous tree recruitment and like. But some of the regulatory agencies are uncomfortable with doing more than just a little bit annually. But if we do that rate, we're not going to get near enough done by the time it really makes a difference. So were you talking about that kind of sense of really pushing the envelope? even if not everybody's on board, if there's some plausibility, just clarification.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Not necessarily pushing the envelope in terms of how other agencies regulate activities. That's really not our role. But in terms of what we're talking about when we use the word tolerance is helping our staff, our reviewers, and our grantee partners understand that we're going to be more willing to take a chance on a good idea. In other words, it's about risk tolerance. And I think some folks out there have said they don't think that they think that our risk tolerance is too low. And they'd like us to increase that a bit. And it does mean taking a chance. And it does mean potentially putting money toward a project that isn't going to achieve goals that you wanted to achieve. But in some ways, we've always done that, right? We were willing to put money to technical assistance where we don't know what the design is going to be coming out of that. And so you can go through your alternatives analysis and find that you don't really have a feasible path forward. We've just spent, however much money on that, but it's money worth spending because it's, then people are going to take, okay, how else can we address this problem, take it to the next step. So in some ways, we've always had some level of risk tolerance, but I think this is really about project types. And I think we're going to see more of this in terms of keeping water higher in the watershed longer, managed aquifer recharge, things of that nature, where we've seen a little bit of it in the past, recent past. But I think we're probably going to see more of it. And if we're going to make those kinds of things, at least the ones that work, more commonplace, we're going to have to take the chance and fund them for the early adapters. And so that's what this is talking about.
Thank you. Liz, please.
So we may be past this comment, but I was going to just go back to what Jamie said and about learning. And so I do like this idea that leaders are learners, and this idea that maybe we can continuously learn and lead toward climate change resilience. There's a football coach that said something like that, and now it's gone out of my mind because I'm not a sporty person, but that's all I had.
No, I shouldn't. Clear minds, full hearts can't lose.
So Meg, did you have something you wanted to add? Okay, and then Bruce.
So I just want to say that I affirm everything in this document. I've been pretty quiet today. And I appreciate all of my colleagues' comments. And I was thinking, am I just jet lagged? But I think when I read this before I left the state, I thought it was a really good product, and I still do, basically. Yeah. And I particularly like Priority 6 and the phrasing of Strategy 6.1, because I think really what stands between us and bold and innovative action is usually risk tolerance. And so I don't mind using the word tolerance. And I'd like to see us, put the pedal to the metal on bold and innovative action. So I'd like to see it stay here as it is, but that's all. Thanks.
Bruce, and then Mark Labhart.
I would just remind the board that it wasn't that many years ago when the arguments we were having or the discussions we were having was, wait a minute, everything we already do is good for the climate. So we really don't need to change anything. It's every project we do. So now we've gotten to this point, and I am just so proud of the board and the staff and everybody involved that we can have discussions on the wording of bold and innovative, and we've come a long way, and thank you.
Mark Labhart.
Yeah, we're down to the lumpers and the splitters. And so back to the tolerance things, maybe it would be just as easy, because I think Eric's clarified it, just put in risk tolerance and be so we make it clear that's what we're after, not just tolerance of everything, but, identify it. We're trying to identify risk here. That's what's clear. And then Liz's comment about, I forgot the wording, but, stick that in there too, and it makes it more clear. But I can live with that too, and I agree with Bruce. This is pretty good stuff.
It is.
It's risk, money, or the
Risk
fact that we might be doing harm.
All right, does anybody else have any questions or comments on this slide? All right, there's a lot of side conversations going on now. Go ahead, Chris.
Warmed up.
Thanks. I guess just to throw out one other potential word substitution, I do feel like tolerance implies that we weren't before. I think just replacing that word with support, increased support for, is potentially a simple solution.
Or just increase bold and innovative action, more direct, right?
Sure.
All right, anything else on this slide? All right, moving on.
Just briefly, next steps. We will take your comments and integrate that. A few of them we'll need to have some discussion about internally. And then sharpen evaluation strategy for outputs and outcomes so that we can build out an M&E strategy to accompany this, finalize with the executive director, and then integrate into operational plan. Since this is a strat plan, it will need legs then, even more specifically, to get into operations. So that will be ensuing.
Yeah, thanks. And then just a couple additional comments. We're working on a process to really track the outputs and outcomes so the agency can evaluate progress, and how to have that in a meaningful format that we can really get information from the staff that are working at all levels throughout the agency and throughout the state. And we anticipate providing quarterly feedback or quarterly feedback on the process in line with what the governor's office is expecting from all agencies. And that could include a report that's part of the book that the board receives in advance of each of your quarterly board meetings, that you're currently receiving those reports, and they will continue and may look a little different as we move forward.
Anything else from anybody? All right, thank you very much. Thank you, my colleagues, for engaging. That was great conversation. Really good input. So go for it.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Need any logistical? No? Okay.
All right, there's no logistics to be discussed, so I will see you all here in this room at 8:30 tomorrow morning, and this meeting is adjourned.